there was a real death of the scene between probably like 1997, 98, and kind of like 2006 or so when we were starting. There was that whole period of time where like new metal was a thing, and like post metal was a thing, and doom and sludge and all that kind of Sun Incarnate and Isis and Cult of Luna and all that sort of stuff was a really big thing on the landscape. So I don't know, like I guess we'd come through some of that stuff, and it just didn't feel very genuine for us to sort of just be sticking corpse paint on and going like, yeah, we're a black and white black metal band from the UK, because it wasn't what we were about. We were about, the organic nature of the stuff, and it being more about like atmosphere and landscape and nature and folklore and history, rather than nihilism and Satanism and death and destruction and wherever else the kind of like roots of the genre come from.
Greetings, Legion. Welcome to episode 241 of Into the Necrosphere. This week, I am joined by Chris Naughton and Nick Wallwork, founding members of the legendary UK black metal band Winterfylleth. Their new album, The Imperious Horizon, is career-defining. It drops on September the 13th through Candlelight Records, and of course they were on hand to tell me all about the making of the album. We also covered a host of other topics. That conversation is coming your way very shortly, but before we get to that, Bruka are a black metal quartet hailing from the mean streets of Austin, Texas. They've just put out their debut record, unsigned, which means that gives them entryway into the hallowed halls of the Into the Necrosphere independent band spotlight. So here they are right now for your listening pleasure with a track called Pathways to Ruin. Pathways to Ruin is the name of the song. The band Bruka out of Austin, Texas. Their debut record is entitled Death's Promise, and you can check it out on Bandcamp right now. I love the whole thing. I am very proud to have featured them on the Independent Band Spotlight, and of course, if you're an unsigned band, you've just spent your last penny on your best ever recording, drop me a note. I am more than happy to check it out. The email address to send it to is intothenecrosphere@gmail.com, or you can just hit me up on Instagram or Facebook. I do have a bit of a backlog, so if I don't get to it straight away, don't worry, you're not being ignored. I will get to it when I get to it, but thanks to all of you who have sent me stuff so far, and hopefully I've helped the Legion discover some new music in the process. My friends, if you are new to Into the Necrosphere, and judging by the statistics, there's about 46% of you that are every single week, and you like what you've heard so far, then make sure you beat the subscribe button on your platform of choice until it begs you for mercy. You also need to be following, very critically, my fellow horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. A unit of men, elite men dedicated to delivering wall-to-wall high-quality entertainment from Monday to Sunday. Every Monday, we kick off your week with an installment of Horror Wolf 666, brought to you by the inimitable Brandon Legion. Every Tuesday, yours truly casts hexes and slays poses on Into the Necrosphere. I know that I'm a day late this week. It was for a good cause. I had Tony from Oranzi Pazuzu on StreamYard. That conversation ran a bit long, but rest assured it was well worth it. That conversation's coming your way in 2 weeks' time. Next week, I'm sitting down with Christopher Dean, better known as Necro's Horns. He is, in my opinion, bar none, the best music photographer working right now, but he is way more than that. This dude has got some wild stories. Amongst other things, he used to be a commercial pilot, grew up in Panama. He's just got fucking crazy stories to tell for days. So that conversation is one I can't wait to share with you, and it's coming next week. We've also got us another premiere on the Sphere next week, so lots to get excited about. But in the run-up to that excitement, you've got Mike Hill with Everything Went Black on a Wednesday. Every other Wednesday, we double up your pleasure when Cheyenne of the band Trivax brings you another installment of Iblis Manifestations. Sensei Mike Hill returns every Thursday alongside co-hosts Sheriff Mike Scandado and Professor Jeff Kashid for another well-worked episode of Necromaniacs. Truly one of my favorites of the week. It is absolutely essential listening if you love horror movies. And then on a Thursday and again on a Sunday, we have the Reverend Carl Hikara, the sinister minister and co-host of many a weekly news rant on this very podcast. He brings you another episode of his curated journey through the dark, the weird, the arcane, and the esoteric. And that podcast, of course, is Soul Knox. I mentioned the news rant just a second ago. When I am done talking to Chris and Nick, don't go anywhere, because there's another full-length, fully throated installment of the news rant coming your way, whereby I will be rounding up the latest singles on Metal Storm and wherever else I can find them for judgment. And I'll be giving you my thoughts on a couple of things going on in metal today. Right now, though, sit back and welcome Nick Wallwork and Chris Naughton of Winterfylleth. I'm going to start off after having gone through my entire offline preamble with probably one of the most important questions, and that is whether either of you have seen Alien Romulus. Because I've not had a guest that's mentioned it yet, and I know Nick is brilliant, and I want to talk about it. So, you saw it, Nick?
I went to see it. When did I go see it? Just over the bank holiday weekend. Yeah.
What did you think?
I thought it was very entertaining. It's. I saw a few sort of things that they've been showing in the cinema about the director wanting to it being a bit of a pure horror movie, in space, like the original Alien film is. It very much is that. I was a big fan of Prometheus, to be honest. That seems to get a bit of a bad write-up. That trilogy was never concluded by Ridley Scott because no one really cared about it, as far as I'm aware. So, it was great. It was a worthy addition to the franchise, I think.
Chris, you haven't seen it yet?
No, I'm not really a film guy. I have to say, like,
Really?
I leave that for Nick and Simon. Yeah, they're the ones who are deep into the kind of horror and stuff like that. I find myself deep enough down the rabbit hole of like new albums and like whatever we're doing on our own to have any kind of mental bandwidth for movies as well as that. To be honest, like I watch the occasional thing, but like my to the kind of the mirth of my bandmates, my kind of end of films has always just been the kind of brain dead sort of shooty uppy, blowy uppy kind of film, just because like I'm not averse to the kind of nose breathing arty films and things like that, but I don't know, my day is full of intellectualism and you know all that sort of stuff, and so
You need a break.
By the time I get to movies, I'm just like just want to watch something blow up.
Yeah. No, I understand where you're going from. Alien Romulus, I think that Fede Alves hit a perfect middle ground between the action of Aliens and the tension of Alien. I really, really was impressed. I've tempered my expectations when it comes to movies and TV shows over the last couple of years because I think much of what gets released is complete garbage. But I was very, very impressed. I really enjoyed it.
It's supposed to be set between the first two, I think, isn't it, in the timeline. So there's a lot of retro-looking electronics on board the ship, and they've done it purposefully to kind of look a little bit more akin to the original Alien movie, I think. There's not a massive reliance on CGI, which was quite nice for a modern movie. There's a lot of more sort of animatronics and whatnot going on with the creatures. So, thumbs up from me, I think.
Yeah, same. Yeah. One thing with Prometheus, and this, you're going to be impressed with how I segue this into Winterfylleth. But with Prometheus, I think one of the biggest issues was they fucked with something that didn't need messing around with, and I think it pissed people off tremendously. You know, people went to go watch Prometheus, including me, wanting to see xenomorphs. I came out of the movie, I was like, you've got a perfect formula. It works extremely well. You don't have to repeat the formula, but don't stray so far from it that people don't know what the fuck is going on. Which brings me to Winterfylleth, because you guys have been a band that, you know, really kind of color outside the lines whenever you feel like it. And listening to the Imperious Horizon, I actually went all the way back and I listened to the Ghost of Heritage, the Threnody of Triumph, like the old stuff. It's actually pretty amazing, especially when you compare the new material to the Ghost of Heritage, like how much you guys have evolved and developed as a band over the course of, 15 odd years now?
I think we're getting towards our like 17th or 18th year now. Yeah, I think we started sort of properly in 2006.
Yeah, you're right.
2006, I think, was when we started. We put our first demo out in 2007, and then 2008 was when we managed to get the Ghost of Heritage record together. It's an interesting one, you know. I guess the progression of the band. Obviously, when we first started, you know, Simon and I started the band as a side project in a sense. Like we were both playing in the other band Atavist at the time, doing a lot of stuff there, and that kind of more like death doom, a little bit sludgy at the time sort of space. So we've been doing that for a long time, and then kind of decided that we wanted to try and do something in the black metal world. And I guess some of that, I can hear a lot of that in the Ghost of Heritage. You know, to my mind. There's a bit more of the kind of punk influence, perhaps, of my kind of younger years, and songs like Mantor, The Ghost of Heritage, Casting the Runes, and things like that. But then when you get to the songs like Forging the Iron of England, for example, that has a real kind of doom metal influence that I think was still a bit of a hangover from Atavist when we were doing that. And I certainly know that we brought the tuning over from Atavist and things like that. You know, we still played the very low tuning. I think that we never changed that, and that kind of came to perhaps be somewhat of the sort of defining sound and tuning and way of writing the material that sort of lands us where we are today. So I think that the foundations have not changed enormously in terms of the sort of base starting point for that. But then obviously as we move forward after that, you know, Nick joined before we recorded Mercy and Sphere, so he was involved in the writing of that. And so really, like, from then onwards, it was a much more different beast, really. You know, like it wasn't just me writing the music, it was me and Nick, and then a guy called Mark Wood for a few years who played lead guitar. I think what's been good about the band over the years is there's always been the core of myself and Nick doing it. But then we've had Mark Wood for a few albums until Divination of Antiquity, and then we had Dan Cap for a few albums playing the guitar, and then he left last album. And then we've had Russell Dobson, who
I'd say you got the legendary Russell Dobson now.
So he's been on there. So and around that we had Mark Deeks join about 2013 or 14, kind of doing keyboard stuff and vocals and things like that. And so the band's evolved around all of that, I guess. And well, I think we would all agree that there's a sort of a Winterfylleth sound to an extent. I think we've never tried to, or rather, not that we've never tried to like move away from it, but rather I think we've always kept a sense of that in our heads when we've been making new stuff. But what's been nice is that we've always had, as maybe a foil to Nick and myself, like Mark or Dan or now Russell, as someone whose head goes to a very different place, with the music or with the riffs and things like that. And so it sort of pushed us into a few new corners and a few new directions, in the writing of the album, particularly on the new one. I think that Nick and I have written so many of the albums together and kind of have a very similar way of thinking and writing that we can almost like finish each other's riffs sometimes. Whereas like Russell particularly is a much different player than I think me or Nick. And so there's been a few times in the album we think, well, me and Nick maybe go this way, but Russ goes that way. Maybe let's follow that path for a change and kind of see where things go. And I think that led to some really cool stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's been nice to have a few different people be a kind of a foil to the way that you would normally do things. I don't know how Nick feels about that, but that's certainly how I sort of interpret it.
I was going to ask, if you followed a similar blueprint for such a period of time, when you have a wild card like Russell added to the mix, that must make it way more fun for you from a creative perspective, because there's things that are coming your way that you don't necessarily expect, and I guess it becomes a little bit less predictable.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, obviously, like Chris said, like there's been the core of me and him writing a lot of the stuff in the past, and there were certain riffs that Russ was bringing in. There's 2 songs on the new record that I think really bear Russ's influence on them, and that's the one that's just come out is To the Edge of Tyranny, and there's going to be the closing song on the album called The Insurrection as well, which was born of a really sort of mid-paced Norwegian sounding riff. It was kind of, we were calling it like the cold riff, as in the band Cold, just that kind of mid-paced stomp, and it was based around that, and it does occur in the song, but it was maybe a bit too outside the box at the start. So it's gone through the Winterfyllethizer, should we say, and then it's but it means that your head's in a completely different space to where it was at the start than where it would have been usually between maybe myself and Chris, So it's been interesting to have these kind of riffs brought to the fore a bit more and see what we can do with them,
Well, when Russ sort of first joined as well, Necronautical's music, like obviously we're very different entities in terms of like what we sound like aesthetically. So if you ever watch Russ play, like he's a much more kind of, I don't know, 250, 260 BPM kind of choppy across the strings, like riffs that kind of are very fast, like on the beat, kind of almost pushing the beat at points because it's so kind of like speedy and kind of technical. Whereas with Winterfylleth stuff, I think it's much more, or it has been over the years, kind of smoother and sort of more, like flowing, undulating, rather than like jagged left or right hand turns and stuff. And we've had this kind of atmosphere and I don't know, like kind of rolling nature to the songs a little bit. So it's quite an interesting thing. He joined the band and is a really different player than myself or Nick probably. But it was good in the sense that we probably spent a few years with him not writing, in a sense. We put the last record out. He joined fairly soon after that came out, but obviously we had all the COVID stuff, and so we didn't really tour it properly for 18 months or almost 2 years. And so we were kind of doing a lot of rehearsals in that time and things. And so you kind of get into how one another plays, and so I think that was a really good thing, because I wonder if we'd have started writing stuff straight away with Russ, whether it would have had a bit more kind of clash. But he then learned how we play. We knew what each other's strengths and weaknesses were and stuff. And actually, I think coming into this one, it's probably one of the only albums I think we've made in a long time that felt quite, I don't know if easy is the right word. Records are hard to make, but easier certainly, because there's 4 guys writing in the band now, in a sense. And so if you haven't got an idea, someone else tended to, and I think it was just a really kind of collaborative and great process this time. And obviously there was I'm sure there's probably a few moments of disagreement or whatever, but my enduring memory of it was that it was quite straightforward. And I think that it's interesting that probably the most Winterfylleth riff on the whole album, which is the sort of second or third riff in the track Upon This Shore, came out of Russell. And I thought it was brilliant because he brought it to us almost just like, is this too Winterfylleth? And we were like, well, we are that band, so I think it's probably okay to kind of have a sense of yourself in your riffs. So I think it's fine. If you were bringing that into Necronautical, maybe it would sound a bit weird, but yeah, actually it's been great.
Does being so, I'm gonna the observation that I'll make about Winterfylleth. I think the first time I saw you guys play live was maybe 2016 or 2017. You were opening for Taka. And then I saw you at Inferno this year, and the difference between the band I saw opening for Taka versus the band I saw on stage for at Inferno was night and day. The amount of confidence that you guys had coming on stage in Norway was just, I mean, I'm wondering, as you're talking about this ease of collaboration, creation of the new record, whether that doesn't somehow play into it as well. It kind of feels like, if I had to try and summarize it, I'd say you all seem an awful lot more comfortable and confident in your own skins, and the band also seems to me to be much more of a collective, much more of a defined unit on stage. If I take that Inferno performance as an example.
Yeah, maybe. I think that probably just comes with time, I suppose, and more gigs under your belt. And like you say, we've got Russ now. We've got Mark, obviously, Mark's been involved with the band going back to Divination of Antiquity, but he's been a sort of regular live member now for a little bit longer. Well, sorry, in the more recent times. So, yeah, I mean, it does feel like more of a unit when we play live, and maybe that gives us a little bit of boost internally to project it a bit more. I don't know.
You had a bit of a boost prior to that as well, because you were touring with Emperor you were supporting Emperor when they were in the UK, right?
Yeah, there was shows. Yeah,
it was great. Yeah, we've had the chance to do some great things with some classic bands over the years as well. It's an interesting one. Just come back to what you were saying there about like confidence and things. I don't think we've ever not been confident, but I certainly think that I guess as we've developed as a band and as players, I feel like we've perhaps learned to be comfortable with how we express the music live a bit more. I certainly think that we've developed, we've got better instruments, we've kind of we've got better as players, we've pushed ourselves to kind of write things in the way that we play and find sort of interesting atmospheres in the music. But you get to know how you play over the years and things like that. And one of the things that I think people didn't understand about us probably in the early days was like why we look the way we do, like why we make the kind of music that we make and things like that. And I guess as we've sort of done more and kind of proven ourselves more and are more comfortable with the idea of like Winterfylleth as its own thing rather than it trying to fit into some predefined definition of black metal or something, then you can draw confidence from the fact that you may be doing something that's a little bit different or that's kind of pushing things in a sort of a different way, and you're kind of happy to stand in front of that, and you take heart in that, I guess.
Did you guys ever dabble? I mean, you brought up the aesthetic. Did you ever dabble with the idea of doing something that's, I mean, maybe not corpse paint, but I mean, there's loads of different ways in which bands dress up and present themselves on stage. Was there ever a temptation to do something similar to that?
I don't think so. Not from my perspective. I don't know whether you've ever thought about kind of donning the corpse paint. Yeah. I mean, the original idea with that really was, myself and Simon beforehand, certainly when we were kind of starting the band, we'd been in like reasonably well-known bands already. I think Atavist had done probably 4 or 5, 6 maybe releases by that stage, and Simon had been in a few of the bands on Candlelight as well. So I don't know, because like certainly the vibe with Atavist at the time was kind of backs to the audience, just let the sonics kind of be the thing that you interact with, kind of get overpowered by the kind of heaviness of the music. It was sort of, I guess, organic in a sense that there was no huge theatre behind the whole thing, and so it would have felt really strange to me, not just because of that, and people knowing me and Simon maybe from other bands, but also just because it was 2006. And you have to put that in the context of what the landscape was like around then for music. You know, those early Burzum and Mayhem and Dark Throne and Emperor albums and all those kind of things that came out in the the early 90s. There was a real death of the scene between probably like 1997, 98 and kind of like 2006 or so when we were starting. There was that whole period of time where like new metal was a thing and like post metal was a thing and doom and sludge and all that kind of Sun and Incarnate and Isis and Cult of Luna and all that sort of stuff was a really big thing on the landscape. So I don't know, like I guess we'd come through some of that stuff and it just didn't feel very genuine for us to sort of just be sticking corpse paint on and going like, yeah, we're a black and white black metal band from the UK, because it wasn't what we were about. We were about, the organic nature of the stuff and it being more about like atmosphere and landscape and nature and folklore and history rather than nihilism and Satanism and death and destruction and wherever else the kind of like roots of the genre come from. So from my perspective, it was always something like we didn't want to be characters in that. We would rather the music and the artwork and the backdrop or whatever it might be kind of speak for that a little bit. So that's how I always felt about it. I don't know if you feel different, Nick, but that was kind of always my perspective on why we never did it, because it didn't really belong to us in a sense. I think it's cool when like Gal does it, but me doing it 15 years later or something just doesn't feel real to me.
I think also if you look at some of the major bands that maybe are seen as maybe more primary influences for the Winterfylleth sound and what kind of caused the band to form. If you've got stuff like, we've got stuff like Primordial and Drukt and Ukraine and these kind of bands. And maybe like Drukt is a good example because, there was never a photograph of Drukt on any one of their records. There's just some evocative nature imagery. The music speaks for itself and it's the emotion of what you feel in that music, which is the important thing. And we weren't really drawing from the well of those kind of Dark Thrones and Mayhems and stuff, even though obviously we're all into that, but it wasn't really the sort of stuff that we were drawing from. So it would feel strange for a band of this nature with this particular sort of atmosphere, I think, to go down that path. So yeah, it just didn't seem really natural, really, for that sort of approach.
I'm very much a student of, and I'm extremely interested just generally in kind of the science of performance. I've spoken about it many times on the podcast before as well. And that's true of music. It's true of every a number of different things. I look at, people that play sports. I look at, pro wrestlers. And what's always been interesting to me is the people that appeal to the audience most are always the people that are, they're basically a authentic version of themselves with the volume turned up. So if you take MMA, for example, Georges St. Pierre is a softly spoken guy. If he had taken the mic after a fight and, suddenly started running down his opponent and trash talking them and stuff like that, I don't think people would have bought it because they wouldn't have seen it as being authentic. But exactly to your point now, if Gol walks on stage, with corpse paint and, looking grim and evil, as he did, around the Twilight of the Idols and Ad Majorem Satanas Gloriam, people buy into it. In a weird way nowadays, if he were to go back and do that now, I don't necessarily think people would feel the same way about it as they did then, because now they know him in a different way, and I don't necessarily think that's something that's sort of embedded in his soul either. As a side note, by the way, as you mentioned it, Chris, I completely agree with you about black metal kind of dying a little bit during that period. I do think, and again, something I've mentioned before, Ad Majorem Satanas Gloriam, to me, that's the album that brought black metal back. Like, I think you can draw a direct line from that record to a load of the other great stuff that came afterwards, and the scene really kind of getting new life breathed into itself. That was an album to me that was so unbelievably confrontational and fucking just nasty, filthy. Like, everything that was great about black metal was wrapped up in that record to me.
It's definitely an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like all those records are really important in the sort of the greater landscape of black metal, I guess. But then, if I sort of frame it from where we were at that time, we were probably in our early 20s, and like Nick said, drawing from a kind of a different pot of influence from that. So I think I certainly came back to records like that, but I was never. I don't think I was ever there at the time. For me, it was almost this sense of like people had kind of got a little bit bored of that whole sort of pentatonic stoner and sludge riff and that kind of the the oppressive, nature of like the very, very heavy stuff, and it just, obviously it's still endured, and there's still lots of people that like that, but the bubble definitely burst and all that sort of stuff. I remember there was days when some of us met when in the pre-social media days on forums and things like that, where bands like Sun and Carnate, they're doing like £50,000 a night in merch and all this sort of stuff like that. You can't even comprehend how big that stuff was around that period of time, and where people's heads were in terms of metal. And so I think it was good that it came back. I think didn't that Thorns album come out in around that time as well? Wasn't that kind of the sort of first few years of the 2000s when that
yeah, I think so.
I'm trying to think now.
2003 maybe, was it?
It was 2001.
Yeah, so like for me, that was one of the albums that was one of the sort of few great things that kind of landed in that time period. And there was still some stuff bubbling away, but yeah, it was definitely not that. I mean, you even have to look at bands like Iron Maiden and some of the kind of major metal bands, and like the stuff that was going on around there, Slayer and whoever else. Like there was just this weird thing going on in metal around that time that it all kind of lost its way because of the popularity of all the new metal and post metal and all this sort of stuff. And so I'm kind of glad that it came back around. But also from the UK perspective, when we started, it felt like it wasn't a thing then, like there was stuff that got, obviously there's Cradle of Filth and Balsagoth and Catian Throne and those bands that had done some great stuff years before, but there was never a sense of like a UK black metal scene or anything like that. There was never a sense of I don't know, there was something bubbling at that time. It very much felt like kind of virgin ground for me, in a sense.
I think the only things that really sort of came around from the UK to my memory at that time, because there was that Thorns record, and then there was, I think, a really key record was Rebel Extravaganza by Satyricon. I think that's...
I love that album.
Yeah, it's my favourite Satyricon album, definitely. But it's brutal, but it's got this really urban sort of different aesthetic to it to the early stuff, and it ties in with everything that Moonfog was doing at the time. And then to move from that into, I think from the UK, you then kind of got the first Anil Nathrat record, and it was the Axis of Perdition as well, coming out doing these more sort of, I don't know, want a better word, urban take on black metal, if you like, with more of an industrial sort of element to it. And that seemed to be where things were going, really. And then there was the first Winterfylleth record, which I wasn't a part of, so I can talk about that as a as a fan of it. But that was really it as far as I was aware from the UK in those times, really.
You neither of you, and this is a disgrace really, but neither of you have mentioned the greatest band from that era to be in England, and that was Acrococker. They lost their way on Renaissance and Extremis. I mean, I don't even want to talk about how much I hate that record, but Go to Mendes, Corazon, and Words That Go Unspoken, and Antichrist, I absolutely love. And I remember seeing them the first time opening for Cradle of Filth, not knowing what to expect, seeing these blokes walk out on stage in their suits, and my jaw just like hit the floor. I was like, holy Jesus, this is the most fucking evil, violent, relentless thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I was hooked as soon as I saw that.
Yeah, they had a great thing in the early days. I remember going to local shows at a place near Manchester called the Witchwood, which always used to have some underground stuff going on. And I saw them play with Hecatatian Throne twice there, and they were in the full suits era at that point. And yeah, it was this really brutal take on stuff. Obviously, a heavy death metal influence. The vocals are some of the most guttural death metal vocals you could ask for as well in that early stuff. So it's Go to Mendes is completely extreme, even by
I said to Jason Mendonça once, like the way I would describe Corazon in particular, it's like Suffocation recording Effigy of the Forgotten in the same room with Emperor doing In the Nightside Eclipse, and then having Jazz Coleman from Killing Joke producing it. It's kind of that and he laughed because he was like, Geordie from Killing Joke is like my biggest guitar influence. And as soon as he mentioned that, I was like, fuck it, that makes so much sense, because you hear the way that they play. It's kind of this sort of open-ended, discordant playing that they were doing, again, especially on that record. But yeah, genius, absolute fucking genius.
I just found that period of time really odd, though. Like when I look back on it, like because none of that to me is black metal in a sense. It is and it isn't. Like, if you think about Anal Nathrak, if you think about Code, if you think about Acts of the Perdition and Akakok and all those kind of bands that are coming out, it's like there's sort of maybe a little bit of thorns to it perhaps, but there's certainly a kind of an edge of the industrial, an edge of the death metal.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So yeah, even then to me, like, they're all like super important extreme British black metal bands, I think, but in the sort of landscape of kind of things like black metal, I don't know how they fit for me. I never sort of thought of them in that space necessarily.
I think I've got incredible affection for that era because that's when I moved here. So I moved to the UK in 2002. And I was starting to see all these bands that I'd loved in South Africa. I thought I would never get the chance to see, and I started meeting people because I was writing for Chronicles of Chaos. I remember not liking Anal Nathrak when I first heard it. I heard the Codex Necro, and I was like, this is a fucking load of shit. Almost for the same reason that you mentioned now. It was like I was expecting black metal, and I didn't hear it. It was Eschaton that turned me to that band, and then I went back and I listened. I was like... I'd worn Eschaton out completely in the space of about 6 months, and I said, okay, let me try the Codex Necro and Domine Non Est Dignus again. The Codex Necro, definitely agree with you. It's not classic black metal, but oh my god! I mean, if you hear Submission is for the Weak, it is. In terms of attitude, I kind of feel like it was the next step on from the menace that you had in the early days in black metal. Like, whatever Euronymous and Varg were trying to do in black metal, I feel like Submission is for the Weak, like almost injected that with steroids. And, that was the Codex Necro generally as an album is what came out.
There's a lot of grind in there as well, isn't there? I think.
Yeah.
In that first album.
By the way, how utterly insane is it that Mick Kenny is now a world famous electronic music, I mean, I was about to say guru, but like electronic music superstar.
Yeah. It's great though. I mean, what I'll say, like, I mean, we've known Mick a long time, I think, and Simon particularly. Like, Simon grew up in that scene around those guys, with Duncan and Mick and Steve, Mick's brother, and all those guys around then. I think Simon even played in one of the earliest incarnations of Frost, that band that Mick did in and around Nathrak as well. But yeah, I mean, like, Mick's a super hardworking guy. He's been putting out like albums and albums and albums every year, all sorts of stuff all over the years. I remember when those guys had turned up on things like Nevermind the Buzzcocks on TV and stuff at the like the Christmas specials and things like they've been a really prolific band, and like I think sometimes you could maybe be like jealous about those things, but actually, like, I'm really, really happy for him because I think he's been one of these guys that just like absolutely knew what he wanted to do and like kind of took himself over to America, I think, to maybe further that. Has been like working, producing bands and all this sort of stuff. And I think I would generally say that like I am actually like super proud and happy for him because he's like just done something that I think we'd all like to do, and maybe not exactly in his like favorite ever genre of music, like obviously a lot of extreme metal stuff, but it's amazing that he's had such an impact on the scene like that. And even like some of our other friends like James Kelly, who was the guy behind Altar of Plagues, he's doing lots of kind of like crazy soundtrack stuff now for like some of the TV shows and things like that out there. So it's definitely possible, but it's just crazy when you know that you've kind of got drunk with those guys at Scruffy Murphy's in Birmingham, and then all of a sudden they're like kind of on the international stage,
cruising around in a Lambo, dating a model.
Yeah, I mean, like even before that, I think some of the great records they made in Nathrak and some of the other bands they've been involved in are super worthy. And so even though it's unexpected, I guess I'm glad because the talent was within him,
Yeah, without a doubt. And Anal Nathrak, one of the most consistent bands on the face of the earth up to Endarkenment. Endarkenment, for me, one of the worst missteps.
Is that when the dubstep came in?
No, Endarkenment was when they decided to start turning everything into a fucking sing-song. And it was like, it sounded like football sing-alongs, most of the choruses. Like, the songs were all like fast and heavy. It had the hallmarks of Anal Nathrak, but the choruses just wrecked it for me. I was like, how do you put out a new kind of horror and then you churn out this shite? It was just it's unacceptable.
Yes, you heard it here first.
Don't hold back.
Dude, I just had if you watched it today, I had King Fowley of Deceased on the podcast, oh my God, it was like we started talking and it was just 90 minutes of him just fucking going wild. Like, this guy was an asshole in the scene when I was, at such and such a time. Yeah, I think it might be infectious. So his lack of filter might have washed over to me. But I mean, as I said, all praise to them. I think I was so disappointed by that record because of how much I love the band. But it was just didn't cut the mustard for me. But getting back to Winterfylleth, we were talking earlier about bands you guys have shared the stage with and you've done stuff with, and we're all kind of the same age. And I think, we also grew up probably liking similar bands. Have either of you ever been on stage with somebody or been backstage with somebody, and you look at it and you almost kind of you almost have to step out of the situation a little bit and go, how the fuck has this happened? Like, I'm on stage with Samoth, or I'm standing, stage left. I've just opened for Emperor, or whoever it was. Like, who was the person that made you like pause and go, how did this happen to me?
You want to say that one, Nick, or do you want me to?
No, Chris, go ahead. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think if there is anybody that's.
I mean, I think there's been like lots of those moments to a greater or lesser extent. I think when you're a young band and you're like the first time you get to play with some band that you've heard of is usually quite a big thing for you. But then, even latterly, we did for the last album, The Reckoning Dawn, we did a sort of 2 and a bit week tour with Gals Weird and with Guerrilla from Portugal, and I just found it almost like surreal that. When you've grown up, I guess, in the scene of black metal and the kind of the whole mystique and the kind of the whole theater and characters that sort of sit within it, you don't realize that, I don't know, like Frost or Satyr or Gal or Ishan or Samoth or whatever, they're just normal guys in a sense, and they exist in the world. And like, you turn up to Norway at some festival like Inferno and they're all there, and you're just like, hang on, you just exist in
you're a real person.
Yeah, you exist in the covers of my albums, and you're on these documentaries like to the Light Takers, and you're in the black metal books and all this sort of stuff. And so there's this kind of lore around those guys that's sort of that's evocative and strange. And so when you meet those guys, it's really odd. Like, we spent 2 weeks on a nightliner with Gar and his band and the guys from Guerrilla and Winterfylleth. So Gar, like me, is not great at sleeping on the bus. I didn't really like sort of being in the bunks when we were in transit a great deal. And so consequently, we out of the 2 week tour, we probably had like 6 or 7 nights where he and I were kind of sat up till we arrived at the place we were going to at 7 in the morning or something, having got on the bus at like 2 in the morning. Just had these like super intense chats and things. And I was really grateful of sort of getting to spend that much time with someone like that, because I don't know, you have this sort of mental image of what people are going to be like, I think, and you sort of see what they're like from their interviews or the kind of aesthetic they put out across themselves. And while I think he is a really super intense dude, he's like really lovely, really interested in you as well. He's not just kind of like just wants to talk at you about what he's interested in. He loved hearing about some of the kind of the ancient British folklore we were telling him about, and how those kind of things had parallels with the sort of Norse stuff that he was super, super detailed and really interested in. We had some of these quite interesting discussions about that stuff. Like, I remember, for example, just telling him, like, because he drinks a lot of wine, and I was like, did you know where the term a toast comes from and all this sort of stuff? And he didn't. And there's some kind of like, there's a few derivations of it, but there's the link to the whole like kind of like blessing of the fields in England and kind of like toasting the fields at wassail events and all this kind of things. I was sort of saying how that kind of emerged. So yeah, I guess the moment for me, well, one of the moments for me, we just sort of sat there going, you were in like Gorgoroth, you were in Wodruna, you were in all these kind of bands that were super important for me when I was coming up to this. And I'm just sat here having a conversation with you, drinking a glass of wine, speaking about like the anthropomorphization of the green man figure in English folklore or something like that. It was highly, highly surreal. And
I watched you on that Vice documentary.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you go up, he's like, "What do I call you, Gal?" And he's like, "No, Christian. Call me Christian or whatever." Like, of course, it's your name, isn't it? Like, why would I call you Gal? But like, you just sort of, I don't know. That's your initial impression, I guess.
I had him on episode 100 of the podcast. That was like really like one of the first really massive episodes that I did. And interestingly enough, it was he, as you almost certainly experienced, he's quite introverted and he's quite standoffish. So in an environment like this, getting him to loosen up was quite a job. Where I really started to get him to open up was when I started talking about wine, because I'm a massive wine fan as well. And when I say massive wine fan, it doesn't mean I'm a fucking alky. I actually take the time to learn about wine and drink good wine. But I would say that some of the more surreal conversations I had, where I was sitting on, recording the conversation, and afterwards I had to think to myself, how the hell did that just happen? Greg McIntosh, because I was such a Paradise Lost fan growing up and still am. David Vincent was one as well, for sure. Because that dude, when I was 13 years old, was absolutely my hero. But the thing that I've loved the most is the people that I've made friends with. Like, there's people that I had posters of them up on my wall, and I speak to them fairly regularly now. That's been the weirdest thing to me. It's like this dude is a mate now. It's someone I talk to really regularly, and it's this is a person that if you told me when I was 17 years old or 16 years old in South Africa, that CD that you're buying off the Nuclear Blast catalog, you're going to become friends with that dude, I would have said you're out of your fucking mind. I don't ask what are you smoking?
Great, yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, but the thing is, you sort of tend to realize when you spend time with people that there's a persona of somebody and then there's the reality of somebody. And I guess that once you get through to that, it's nice. You realize you have a lot in common. Obviously, you're all kind of creative people in your own ways, and you have loads in common with people like that. Even if your personalities are slightly different, there's always a huge vein of that stuff. What about you anyway, Nick?
I was just about to say, Nick, you've had time to think about it now.
I mean, the only kind of real high profile one that I can think off the top of my head isn't myself, but
Jackie Smith on Into the Necrosphere finally got to talk to.
Well, this is I think was Chris and Dave Mustaine, I think, and he wished you a long and prosperous career. Or something like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, we got nominated for this Metal Hammer Award that we won in like 2015 or 16 for the best underground band or something like that. So we had to go on stage and kind of get this award. And that was a bit surreal. There was quite a funny story around that actually as well with Matey Boy from Judas Priest, Nick, do you remember? And I went on stage to
with the guy from Judas Priest.
Yeah. Ultimately, obviously, you go on stage, you get your award, you say hello, and it was on Scuzz TV or whatever it was at the time. It was just funny because I think Danny Filth was giving the award, but then people like Scott Ian were on stage, and like Brian May was there somewhere and all this sort of stuff. But we were queuing up to kind of go onto the stage to collect the award because it was like the next one that they were announcing, and we were sort of stood there and it was dark, obviously it's like a theatre. You kind of stood behind the curtain that you sort of walk through to go onto the stage or whatever, and we were stood there like queuing up, one behind each other, and I think I was stood with Jonathan Selzer from Metal Hammer because he was kind of showing us on. And then this photographer kind of sort of just rushed us all, like, I want to take some pictures or whatever. Like, yeah. Like, he was kind of ushering us all into a line. And there was this guy stood at the end that I kind of hadn't really clocked. And I was just like, oh, no, he's not in the band, mate. And it turns out that it was like Richie Faulkner from Judas Priest.
Jesus.
I didn't notice him in the darkness and just be like, no, he can't be in this photo, man. Like, he's not a member of this band. And then afterwards, I was just like, fuck's sake.
I think you get a bit more
you should have done what Donald Trump did when he was in. Remember when I think it was 2018 or something. He was in some photo with everyone from NATO, and he moved one of the people like behind him, shoved in front of the dude, moved him behind him. You should have done that.
He's like the president of some country or something. Yeah. What are you going to say?
You get more overwhelmed with that, I think, in maybe the early days of you going to play festivals and being able to sort of interact or be around all these bands. I remember, like you say, if you go back in time to looking at the Nuclear Blast catalogue, if you would have told me when I was at, secondary school or whatever, that I could drunkenly accost John Tardy for a photo at 3 a.m. in his dressing room, then I would have thought you were insane. But, that was a funny
legends,
one. He looked genuinely
legends. John Tardy is one of the legend of legends.
Yeah,
I mean, that guy is fucking sick.
He was scared to death by Nick, though.
Oh, really?
I think it was just the manner of my entrance at, say, 3 a.m. He wasn't ready for it, should we say.
But I thought you were going to say you thought it was an undercover police officer.
Yeah. Headlock.
So let's kind of round back to the new album. A couple of days ago, you guys put out To the Edge of Tyranny, which I was kind of wondering whether that was a Russell song. I fucking love it. I think it's really, really cool, and it's a track that it's recognizably Winterfylleth, but it's a little bit different, which to me is awesome. It was an interesting description you guys gave the song when you posted about it on Facebook. You said, To the Edge of Tyranny plunges listeners into the stark realities of a world teetering on the brink of chaos, where the weight of tyranny looms and the struggle for freedom resonates with unsettling clarity. Moving directly into very heavy territory, talk to me a little bit about what, or bring what you said to life for me.
Well, it's a can of worms that I think, obviously as kind of jokey individuals as we can be, and as people who kind of are into all sorts of music from all across the spectrum of stuff. I mean, it's often been down to me a lot. I think that just the way things have worked, being the sort of singer as well, to write lyrics a lot of the time, and so I've always had this this view of Winterfylleth being this kind of like helicopter view of society a little bit. Like, although it's kind of political to an extent, it's not a partisan politics. It's more of a kind of a helicopter politics, if you like, looking across what's going on in the landscape and trying to pass some kind of commentary on that. I think, we've all lived in the same world for the last however long, but particularly since the last album, particularly since COVID and all the things that happened, I don't know, I've definitely felt like the world has become maybe a more divided and maybe more dangerous place since then. And it's quite hard to quantify some of those things sometimes, but I feel like across many, many elements of life, there's lots of different pressures that I think they're often kind of created by design a lot of the time. If you think about, I don't know, even some simple stuff, like, are governments really benevolent entities? Like, you look at what happened during COVID, and at best, governments have spent billions and billions of public money giving their cronies, money to spend on protective equipment that never emerged. But at their worst, they're probably kind of scheming, agenda-driven people who are trying to kind of impose a bit more of a totalitarian regime on people. And I think you can get to a stage of thinking, right, actually, that sounds quite conspiracy. But then you only have to see it kind of played out in action. Things just get chipped away out all the time. And I think that lots of people feel that the walls are closing in around them. Look at everyone's daily existence. Everyone's mortgages have gone up by 100%. Everyone's food bills have gone up by 40%. Everyone's gas and electric bill. Millions of families struggling to feed their children and stuff. And it feels like when you've got, I don't know, Shell or whoever posting record profits for their gas or oil or whatever it might be, you're just like, is this just hapless kind of mismanagement and profiteering, or is there really kind of something big going on here? You like look recently at the kind of the UK government sort of dog whistling about national service and things like that. Well, why would you want that unless you were kind of preparing a country for a conflict or a war? And it doesn't take much to make the leap between what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia or Israel and Palestine to think that America, UK, some of the major countries can get drawn into something quite quickly, probably against the will of the people and for some kind of spurious political means. And so I guess that I feel like that tyranny isn't always as dictatorial as, say, some of the ones that have occurred in popular history, but I think it's little and often and all the time on many fronts. And I worry that if people don't sort of stand up to those things, that it kind of takes us to a sort of not a non-great place, a less free place. I mean, you see elements of this, like look at the kind of like the sort of ULEZ stuff in London, how many people have kind of pushed back against that or whatever. I mean, I know that's only one small thing, but the idea of To the Edge of Tyranny was, how far can you push people before they start pushing back? And most of the time people don't want to engage in these kind of things, and they want to sort of live their happy lives. And it's only really when things start to really encroach on their lives that they would ever sort of stand up about it. And I think you see how passive people are looking at kind of some of the conflicts or other things that go on in the world. And it's like, at what point do you push back? Well, it's when you get towards the edge of tyranny. And I guess that was the idea of that specific song, which was probably one of the more direct lyrics we've written on the album. And I've often sort of strayed away from that, doing things that have got a bit more metaphor in them or that link kind of old ancient poetry and prose into the kind of mix of that, and tried to sort of do it in a bit more of a stylish and elegant way, kind of becoming of the sort of vastness of the music. Whereas I think the lyric to The Edge of Tyranny is almost more like a, not like a crusty punk song or like a Napalm song or something, you know, where it's very much like, you know, you hear like Barney talk on stage at a Napalm show, and he's like, you know, I know it's kind of a taboo topic, but, you know, we need to talk about peace or whatever. And it's just like, well, yeah, like, you know, sometimes you just need to be like, here is a really direct song about like, please fight against depression kind of thing. And so while we've done a lot of metaphors and sort of flowery vocal lyrics, equally, we just thought this time, you know, I had the riff for the kind of beginning of that song, and then me and Russ wrote it, I think, in an evening. It just came out really well. And I think it just couldn't be some kind of flowery language about, you know, a metaphor of like a shepherd and a sheep and wolves and all this kind of stuff like some of the other songs. It had to just be, look, you know, stand up against this. And so I suppose that's where we landed with that one. And that's why I felt like that song kind of embodies some of the wider concept of the album and tries to put some meat on the bones of what we mean by, you know, the Imperious Horizon and this idea of there being a, I don't know, a scheming power kind of just out of sight over the horizon.
Nick, I'm going to draw you back into the conversation, but, you know, something that Chris pointed out there that I've thought about a lot myself, and it really started to become sort of a burning question for me during COVID, and it just has remained so ever since. Why do you think people, or the population, and I would say particularly the Western society, why do you think they've become so passive? Because there is absolutely no doubt about it. I completely agree with you, Chris. I feel like anyone that still believes that the government has your best interests at heart probably are the same people that go to the strip club and think that the girl actually likes you. You know, like, you know, to quote a meme. What I don't understand, and I mean, you know, it's kind of manifested itself in a lot of different ways. I don't understand how so many parts of the metal scene I grew up in, that was always about, you know, questioning authority, questioning things that I'm told by the media, just seems to, you know, very, very placidly accept any sort of nonsense that's fed to them. And then there's kind of a wider problem in society where I think that people, just generally speaking, treat politics like reality television, and like watching sports. You know, they've got their team, they support their team, and they don't give a shit what their team stands for. Most of them don't actually know anything about the policies of the party that they support. And nowhere is that more evident than in the current electoral race in the US, which we can get into. But back to my original question: why have people become so passive and so allowing of these infringements on their rights that, to me, seem to be really gaining in momentum at the moment?
I don't know, really. I mean, if anything, my first thought is that I'm not sure if people have become more passive. I think, if anything, they've become more divided and more extreme in their activity or activeness, if you like. You know, I think the main thing responsible for that is 100% social media. You know, I think that people are now, they're not drawing news from a source as maybe you and I were growing up as kids or whatever. You know, that there wasn't too many channels open to us back then, and I think people are much more kind of prone to go into their own echo chambers now a bit, and only listen to the voices that they want to hear to maybe reinforce their innate beliefs, or whatever, and act on that. I think if you you know, if you see what's happened in the UK, you know, the ridiculous riots and stuff that occurred in the wake of that terrible event in Southport, there is no real reason for that to have occurred on the back of that event, really, but it did, and that, I think, is 100% of a result of people being in their belief bubbles, if you like. And yeah, for me, I don't know if people are becoming passive consumers. I think they're getting more angry in their own little groups and spheres, I think.
Yeah, I think, no, that I think that's a fair point. I kind of feel like I feel like a lot of the outrage and the protesting and the demonstration tends to be, and I exclude Southport from this, but tends to be about things that, in the grand scheme of things, don't mean an awful lot. And to Chris's point about it being by design, I do sometimes feel like whether there's certain things that aren't agitated so that the governments can get away with other things that they might be doing. You mentioned earlier about the national service in the UK. Yesterday night, I stumbled on an article published in The Guardian, written by a guy named Ben Wallace, where this dude he tries to make the argument that Russia is going to, the headline actually is, Putin will soon turn his war machine on Britain. The Kremlin holds us responsible for its failures and will at some point attempt to exact its revenge. I was like, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it feels to me like that is some of the most insane nonsense that I've ever read in my entire life. It's just scaremongering. We're part of NATO. I mean, if Russia were to attack us, they immediately declare war on the US, is my understanding. And I cannot possibly see them risking such a thing, especially not when their military has been quite significantly depleted by the war effort in the Ukraine.
Funny old time with that sort of stuff, really, for me. And I'm just like to, before I get into that, I guess just go back to what Nick was saying there. I think people are way more factioned and angry about stuff.
Yes,
but I also think people are angry about the wrong things, in my view. They're angry with each other because they're put into separate groups, and like Nick said, in that your little kind of like opinion bubble, and that people that don't agree with you. But the stuff that's kind of keeping everybody occupied. But the stuff that's going on above that, I think, is what you should be worried about. Some of the kind of movements that are going on when there's a big story out there, though the government puts some bit of legislation through or whatever that does something spurious, and all of a sudden there's some additional bit of freedom that's gone that you never even knew was on the cards. With the whole Russia thing, I don't know. It feels like people write a lot of nonsense purely to try and engage people in getting them on their page and stuff. Obviously, like an old clickbait thing, but I don't know. I do worry. Like, I think it's something like Denzel Washington said. It's like, what is the long-term impact of too much information? And I think that there's become this thing about finding the information that feels right to you or whatever, and that's what you want to hear. And it's almost like there isn't an objective voice anymore. There isn't a voice of clarity to sort of cut through the noise of what's going on. It's all spun, and it's all just to get you to do something else. And so I guess people are angry about the wrong things because there's so many people writing about the nonsense that sits below that it's it just draws your attention away from the things that are really affecting your life. And I can't believe that we're not all similar to an extent. We all want to live happy lives. We all want to eat nice food. We all want our kids to go to school safely. We all want, little girls who want to go to a dance class to be able to do so safely without some guy attacking them. All these kind of things that I think are universal. The rest of it's just kind of like noise in a sense that sort of strays us from the path of cohesiveness. And I think I've heard some really interesting arguments of why religion might be a good thing, even though I'm not a religious person. It's this whole like kind of galvanizing thing about you all at least having something that is a sort of shared part of your identity. And I think that one of the big things that's been wrong in the world is that everyone keeps getting their identities fractured more and more, and we're all pitted against each other in too many different fronts. And it just leads to a fractured and dangerous world, which brings me back to the whole point of what we were speaking about originally. And I would argue that if you don't have the discourse to sort of highlight those things going on, then you end up in a very, very weird and dangerous place where people see their fellow men as or their neighbors even as like kind of enemies or kind of people to be pitted against. And like you said, looking at the US and their elections and stuff, you only got to see how much of a furor that kind of gets stirred up into about two people who are probably neither of whom are good enough to run the affairs of a nation like that.
Well, also neither of whom, if they were to be elected, run the country as some sort of god king emperor. There are so many checks and balances in place for either side. They can't yes, they can do certain things. They can certainly, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, they can do damage of some kind, but there are still limitations. Something that really opened my eyes to the impact of social media recently. I was listening to a guy named Greg Lukianoff. He's the writer of a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. He's about to bring out the sequel now, where he talks specifically about the impact of social media on Gen Z. And one of the biggest things that he mentioned that completely and utterly blew my mind, because it kind of snapped a couple of things that I experienced in my day-to-day life at work into complete focus. He was talking about how the fact that so many youngsters spend all of their time when they engage in competitive play, all of that competitive play is done online. They don't, they're not out in a park kicking a ball around, or, playing rugby or playing cricket or whatever the case may be. So they never learn any form of self-governance. Like, when we were young, if we were out in a park playing, and one of us argues that the ball is in and the other argues that the ball is out, we have to agree between ourselves what actually happened, or come to some sort of compromise in order for the game to continue. If you're online and you're in a virtual world, the computer does that for you. So because there's this electronic adjudication of any kind of conflict situations, these youngsters don't ever learn how to deal with conflict. They don't ever learn any form of self-regulation or self-governance. And so then when they get into the working world, they fall apart completely, because they've got this very warped perception of what's fair versus unfair. And that thus contributes to what we see right now, which is, this extraordinarily high number of, Gen Z and millennials that are, that are not economically active because of reasons of diagnosed, in my view, overdiagnosed mental health issues. And it's fucking insane, because the argument that this guy makes is, we've essentially, because of social media and because of smartphones, we've essentially lost an entire generation. Like, there is no fixing it. These people have spent too long. They've been, their brains have been wired for too long, and their minds have been programmed for too long, that there's really any reversing it now.
It's completely irreversible. I think that's true. I mean, even just this weekend, I was out and about on Saturday and out in the theme park, and you saw, it's still an eye-opener for me when I see an entire family stood round in a circle staring at a black rectangle. And none of them were interacting with each other, and that is just the state of how things are. And you're never going to get back from that. People are always looking at what is on their feed in their echo chamber. And like you say, the idea of there being a conflict and people will just retreat from that and go back to what they want to see in their feed and see the likes that they're getting on their posts and the people that agree with them. And then when you get out into, the real world, if you like, it's a shock.
Well, I mean, I would go one step further, and I'd say a lot of what we see with this, especially with the Marxist thinking that you see manifest out in the streets when like you had these fucking unhinged lunatics marching in front of the DNC last week, for example. A lot of that comes from a couple of different places. Number one, most of those people are middle class, so there's this resentment from these individuals for everything, including their families, for the fact that they lack the work ethic and they lack the smarts and the skills to be able to maintain the same quality of life that their parents did. And so anybody that has more than them or is perceived to have more than them, they resent. Resentment leads, is a direct line to hatred. The next thing is many of them are, as I mentioned earlier, have been diagnosed with mental health issues. They sit at home doing nothing, and they lack purpose. And in the vacuum of things that bind people together, that bring communities together, like religion, they start to find whatever other nonsense is online, and that thus leads to some of the craziness that you see, that you see play out in public when people are rioting. And that's regardless of it's an apolitical statement, that because it applies as much to the left as it does to the right.
Yeah, I guess that's why. I've always thought like partisan politics in this stuff is kind of in music is a challenge, because there's so many kind of difficulties at either end of that for me, which is why I've always wanted us to try and look through that and not necessarily be better than it or something, but just to try and see through the shades of grey in it, I think, because for me, the albums have to become some kind of measure of where you are in a society at a time, and like what things you're kind of pushing up against. And so, yeah, there's a whole heap of mania kind of going on in the world right now, and it's worrying. Like, those people will be running the world in, I don't know, 20, 30 years or something, and like, what kind of place is it going to be then when some of those ideals like cropping up against governing whole populations and things? It's crazy.
That's the terrifying thing. Did you ever watch the interview with Yuri Bezmenov that was recorded in, I think it was recorded in either the 80s or like the late 70s. So he was a KGB defector, and he was talking about the 4 steps of subversion. So like how essentially the Marxists influenced, or they infiltrated universities, and then from universities it spread to schools, and then it spread to HR departments and businesses, and that's how you kind of infiltrate society-wide thinking, and get people to start, or you start creating that kind of division. And again, the end result of what we're seeing right now. Anyone who's not listened to the interview, I would strongly suggest that you do. It is fucking mind-blowing.
Is he the guy that talks about? Go on, sorry.
No, you were saying?
Is he the guy that talks about like bringing down like a whole country in like 5 or 6 weeks by like seeding certain things into the population and stuff like that? I think I've seen
not 5 or 6 weeks, but over a period of a couple of years. He talks about that. I'm just actually having a gander now. The interview, so you can find it on YouTube, and the interview is about an hour and 21 minutes. It was recorded in 1984. But yeah. Fucking absolutely mind-blowingly, like what he's talking about versus what's actually happened. You sit there thinking like this absolutely bang on. Like he's about 90% accurate almost all the time.
But I guess that's where I suppose we're coming from with this idea that well, for a start, like I think we all grew up, like certainly Nick particularly, like Napalm was a huge kind of influence on him. Like me certainly growing up with a lot of punk and stuff, and I think that whatever else we've been accused of being in the past, I think we've actually come from quite a sort of an anti-authoritarian kind of question everything sort of a background in many ways. And so it's strange to sort of hear things waged against us when I don't feel like we're coming from that place. And I think that you only have to listen to like an example of a guy like that to know that, well, clearly he's come from some kind of government regime that's thinking about those things, that they're definitely not looking out for your best interests, are they? That's the Imperious Horizon to me. It's that kind of like thing going on through the mist over the hill that's just out of your sight, that's plotting to do something to you, to change the landscape, change your behavior, push you towards a certain way of thinking, or worse, like subvert your freedoms or whatever it might be. And it just feels like that's going on at an alarming rate in the modern world, and maybe always has, but I think because we're so much more connected now, these things are just kind of growing pace. And obviously with things like AI coming in and talk of people's jobs being replaced and all this sort of stuff, is at what point does kind of technology outgrow mankind? And well, you get into this whole kind of like gloomy downward spiral of things that might be, and it takes humanity to be cohesive to kind of push back against that. And I worry that unless it gets right to the very, very end of days, it's going to take a lot for people to do that.
Yeah, no,
I mean, these concepts are dealt with quite in a generalist sense as well, I would say, with the new record. I mean, the perfect example is Tyranny, To the Edge of Tyranny. For me, the lyrics to that song, yes, they are direct for Winterfylleth maybe, but I think they're not necessarily dealing with one issue. It's a traditional power struggle song. And it can be looked at, for me, in the same way that an album like World Downfall by Terrorizer is. That particular record lyrically doesn't necessarily approach any particular party or person, but it's a power struggle album. And I think that's the kind of approach that we take with some of this new stuff, I suppose.
I'm very, very confident I know what David Vincent's political leanings are. Well, just as a comment to that, when he said to me, "We don't call cops, we take care of our own problems," it's like I had to laugh. I think you guys come, and it's good synergy that you had Alan Averill on this record, because I think you come at politics from a similar place that he does, you know, questioning, but bringing it back to the human side of things. You know, exactly what you said before about, you know, human beings being, we actually have a lot more in common than we think, but there's this tragedy in modern Western society in particular of people not necessarily seeing that, and they're bickering with each other about all sorts of stuff, and that bickering is going to lead ultimately to our downfall. As an aside, how did the Alan Averill guest appearance on the record happen?
Well, it comes about for, I suppose, the musical idea for the track that he sings on, which is called "In Silent Grace" on the album, was around from the demo period of The Reckoning Dawn. So it was kind of a slow intro riff that I had. Started playing around with that, and it was on the demos for the first album, but literally just intro, one riff, and that was it. So we never really got around to revisiting it at that time, and as we were gaining momentum with the other songs for The Reckoning Dawn, it never really happened. So when we kind of reconvened to look at new songs for this record, we were like, well, should we go back and see if there's anything sort of in the riff bank, you know? And that one was in there, and we sort of revisited that, and I just felt that the feel of it was very primordial in a way, you know, like some of their sort of slower, more epic stuff really like sprang to mind. So we kind of spent a bit more time with Alan in the last few years. We've done some shows with Primordial. We did a little tour of the UK just after lockdown with Dread Sovereign, his other band. And so, yeah, it seemed quite natural to say, well, actually, we're getting this vibe from this song. You know, is it out of the question to approach Alan and see if he fancies doing it, really? And yeah, he said yes, and that was that.
Just as an aside, I am such a fucking massive fan of really everything that man does. But I thought how it ends. I made this point when I spoke about my favorite albums of last year on this podcast. I said that if you are of a certain mindset and you're of a certain age, how it ends is going to speak to you in a way that very few other records will. There's just something that's, you listen to it and you go, yeah, you understand. You know, he gets what this is all about. And then also conversely, Dread Sovereign. I mean, if you're one of the people that got super excited about hearing Venom for the first time, and you know, you were part of that scene where you were having to work hard to discover new music, can't listen to Dread Sovereign and not have a smile on your face. What a band. And that last record that they put out is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're really nice guys as well, the rest of them, you know.
Yeah, they've got sort of a good mix of the, like you say, the Venom sort of Motorhead rock and roll mixed with, I don't know, maybe like Reverend Bizarre style doom metal. You know, it's a pretty cool mix.
He is at his best on Dread Sovereign when he does more of the satanic stuff. That Ruin Upon the Temple Mount where he does that, like I think it's Ruin Upon the Temple Mount. He does this prayer at the end. Fucking, it's just absolute mastery.
But I think that's why he wanted him on the album. You know, like I think we were sat in my like studio at home, and as Nick said, kind of like that song really was sort of the I guess born of Nick. Really, most of the riffs in that one, you know, I think Russell and I kind of very much stepped back from that because he had a really clear idea about that one. But it was just interesting. I think we were sort of sat here one day, kind of like humming melodies, or maybe sort of singing a kind of like a vocal line with no lyrics, and you just kind of hear the sort of maybe like an Alan doing it. You know, it's interesting. He has this strange kind of gravel and unique style to his vocal that's kind of shouty, kind of singy, but then he can reach these really epic high notes and has got quite a wide range on him as well, and it just sort of adds a kind of a gravel and a grit and almost a kind of like Lemmy-ish edge or something to the kind of what could be under some other singer, me perhaps, like quite a sort of sweet sounding song. Like I've got a reasonably good clean singing voice, I think, but it doesn't have that same kind of gravel and attack that someone like Alan does. And I think you almost need that sort of semi-shouty kind of singy style to really bring the emotion out of that track. There's almost a, you know, we talked amongst ourselves about the idea, like if you ever see, I don't know, like the Coffin Ships or something like that being played in the Academy in Dublin at some of the things we supported them at, there's almost this kind of palpable feeling of the the pain of the Irish people that kind of comes through that. And even though it's kind of laid upon them by the British of old, in essence, you know, you still kind of relate to it. And his way of putting it across is just super evocative. And so it's interesting to me because I think we were really keen him be on it because there was a sort of a bit of an edge to like that kind of tempo and, you know, feel that was in that track. But also, I also think that like some of the latter day Primordial stuff has been a bit more kind of slow and introverted. You know, if you look across those last 2 or 3 albums, there's no Rome Burns on there. There's no kind of like Empire's Fall or something. There's a lot more kind of introspection and kind of I don't know, almost like morose kind of like ceremonial vibe to some of it.
Just about to say, what I really took away from how it ends, there's the sadness to it, but it's kind of the sadness. There's sadness and perseverance, I think, are the 2 words that come to mind when I listen to that record.
Yeah, there's a kind of yearning and longing, isn't there, in a sort of like a morose, I don't know, like seeking nature of it, almost like kind of accepting of the way things are. It's great. Go on, Nick.
For me, I think it's funny you say that, this sadness and perseverance thing, because I think that really kind of applies to this particular track. There's a great lyric in there, I think, it's that I must journey through this darkness and, you know, unafraid to treasure in moments. And it's kind of, it's really morose in sound, but it's also defiant as well, I think, in its tone. And that's, you know, so I think he sort of brought that to life for us very well. And yeah, I'm really chuffed with how it's turned out, basically.
When you talk about the kind of English heritage, English culture, English history, you know, that you bring into so much of your music, was it always the intent when you started Winterfylleth for that to be a focal point of your lyrics?
I think yes is the short answer, probably. Like when Simon and I were talking about starting the band originally, there was this kind of we had this sort of feeling that, you know, look across the landscape of black metal, like how many, or not just black metal, heavy metal, whatever else, like how many people or how many bands have you seen over the years that do the whole Norse mythology thing? And I think it becomes kind of like the sort of background context for being in a band in some senses, you know. But then we also thought that like that's super well known, but then it's done in such amazing and evocative ways. Like look at a band like Wardruna, for example, or something like that, that kind of plays with that stuff, and it just has this holy spiritual, like kind of vast atmospheric nature to it. But then you know, you see some bands that do it, and it becomes this kind of like comical mead horns and Viking helmets, like hooray for slaughter and let's drink mead in our mead halls or whatever kind of thing. And it becomes
rowing at Bloodstock. And
it just becomes like this kind of like. I just really don't like that side of it. But like with the UK stuff, as I said earlier, we had this kind of vibe of being an organic band from the UK that was trying to sort of do something and that was in our minds a little bit different, and that we wanted to sort of try and bring some of those similar but unique mythologies and folk tales and things like that to the world as a way of doing it. I think bands like Forefather had done that a little bit before us, but in a much more kind of heavy metal way. And I think that we just wanted to try and do something that had a bit of meaning, but also that sort of showed some of those things. Because, you know, we all went through the school system in the UK and things like that, and it was never something that was really like widely discussed, or maybe it is a little bit more these days, I don't know, but it was certainly just this kind of like almost like the lost history of England. And it's really nice to sort of bring some of that stuff back. I mean, like when we did the acoustic album in 2018, Hallowing of Edom, that was a bit more kind of direct, like just the folk tales and some of the kind of the majesty of the pastoral poetry and the kind of the sort of the deep dark tales of the woods, if you like, and the sort of you know, fairies and mysticism and kind of English magic, I suppose, in a sense. But on some of the other albums, you know, we kind of wove it into this narrative about the state of the world and used some of the kind of old works to sort of bring that to life. And I guess the overarching principle of some of it has just been this idea that even though we're more technologically advanced, I don't think we're any more you know, societally advanced in some ways. There's still wars that go on. There's still, you know, you read some of those ancient poetry from the 1500s, like we have on this album, or you know, earlier in some of those kind of very early Saxon writings from the Exeter book or the Book of Junius or whatever it might be, and you just see this vein of, you know, war and peace and kind of struggle and all this sort of stuff, and it just felt like it was a great evocative subject matter to to talk about some of this stuff and bring it into the modern world. And so I've kind of run with that to an extent over the years, and sort of come at it in different ways, and try to sort of relate what's going on now to some of those things. So in essence, it's always been a bit of a backbone to the band lyrically, but it's become a bit more wrapped in metaphor and a bit more sort of stylish and elegant as I've got older and a bit better at doing it. I think it was quite not sloppy, but certainly like less refined in the early days, and I have definitely got a lot better at that over the years. And I think it helps having smart guys in the band who kind of challenge you as well, and like everyone has a really great role in what we're doing, and like Nick's always super interested in the lyrics and kind of pushes me on them and stuff like that, and I like that. And I always struggle with coming up with titles, but Nick's always great at that. So it's good to have other people in the band that can kind of sort of see through what you're trying to do, but also have another good perspective on it as well.
Were you surprised when you first started getting accusations hurled at the band of Winterfylleth being sketch, whatever dog shit they come up with on Reddit?
Well, yes and no. I mean, like we covered this a lot in that chapter in Dial's book, and obviously before we started this chat, Nick was sort of saying, he's kind of just reread it recently because he's kind of going through the book, and people have got like a leg to stand on there in some senses. Like when we were in the very early days of the band, this guy Chris was in the band, and he sort of said some stupid stuff on his MySpace page at the time. Can you believe that? How long ago that was? And sort of said some stuff, and kind of, I can't even remember the exact ins and outs of it, but it was something like fairly sketchy. But we were a fairly unknown band then, and he was just like talking nonsense on the internet. But he sort of signed it off as like Chris Winterfylleth or something like that, even though he'd only been in the band about like 8 weeks or something. And so consequently, everyone then thought I'd wrote this because I'm the Chris from Winterfylleth or whatever, I guess, who was from the band before and all this sort of stuff. And so I think there was a famous Churchill quote that said something like, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has got a chance to put its trousers on, or something to that effect.
Well, I think it's before the truth laces its boots.
Oh, so there's some variation thereof, but in essence, that kind of felt very true, and this whole thing has just kind of permeated out from there. And I think that's kind of come to define what the band is in many people's minds. And you even to this day, you sort of see people like commenting on our recent videos about, like he's still sketchy right-wing politics and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I don't think we ever have been. I think that there are good ideas from across the whole political spectrum, and I think it's more worrying to faction yourself into one or the other. And actually, we've always tried to have this kind of helicopter view of it. So, like I said, those early accusations have got some standing, some nonsense that was said, and like we tried to deal with it as best as we could at the time. But you've got to think we were like 23, 24 years old, maybe at that stage. It's like almost the entire history of the band ago, and almost our entire discography ago that happened. It was before The Ghost of Heritage was released, for example. So it's like it kind of grew arms and legs, and has maybe just become this kind of like urban lore about the band in a way. And I don't know, I find it odd, like, people sort of said, you've had sketchy talking about X, Y, and Z over the years and stuff. And I was like, well, I don't know if I have or ever haven't. Like, if you can show me something, then that I've said that's been written by me and not by somebody else, or if, then I'll be happy to have a look at it and speak to you about it. I also thought there was quite an interesting thing that, on a slightly unrelated note, that Alan said in a podcast once about having like, the buffering zone for our own kind of like, our own sort of thought process has kind of been eroded now with the internet stuff. Like, people are always kind of keen to chime in and say things about having an opinion on something without really knowing a great deal about it, or having a misguided opinion and then like not being able to kind of like be able to sort of question yourself and question what you said, I think. And we live in such an immediate world, and people have got so little tolerance for digging below the surface of stuff that it's kind of unsurprising that stuff sort of still follows you around in a way. And it's hilarious. Like if you're to like, I don't know, spend any time with it, I think like loads of bands have done it. Like I remember when we were touring with Enslaved, and I think it was Grutler who said to Nick, he was like, in his kind of way that he does, he's like, Nicky, like, you are much more like Napalm Death than I ever imagined that you would be, and all this sort of stuff. And it was something like that effect, wasn't it? And he was.
I think my favorite quote around all of this was, I don't know who put it up there, but someone put Winterfylleth are much more national trust than National Front. And I think that probably sums it up.
Yeah. I'm surprised that it still follows you guys around. I mean, after nearly, or as you mentioned at the start of the conversation, nearly 2 decades in the public eye, not a whiff of a scandal about the band, with the exception of something someone stupidly wrote on MySpace. You know, you would kind of think, okay, our body of work and our conduct would suggest that, you know, we're not the we're not the dangerous people that you've tried to make us out to be.
I don't even know what it means. What does it mean? Even if we were or we weren't, I don't. You know, so you do or you don't like the record. You know, like I don't know. I'm still getting up tomorrow morning. I've still got to like kind of go to the shops and like take my son to school and stuff. I don't know. Like I'm not quite sure what it's all for. If I'm honest, like why are you bothered? Like what somebody that you don't know may or may not think. And like,
I also think, you know, it's another thing going back to the whole social media thing, but you know, it's a few dissenting voices online that in the grand scheme of things doesn't really translate into reality. I mean, I've been in the band since Ghost of Heritage came out, and there was a little bit of, you know, hoo-ha online at the time, and I was quite happy to join because, you know, I knew Chris and I knew what the score was, and I've certainly not personally come into any sort of confrontational situation about this at any point in 15 years, 16 years. So, you know, you got to look at it a little bit more sort of balanced and say, you know, there's a couple of comments on a forum here versus all these people here to watch the band for the right reasons and whatnot.
Well, I'm also with Dale when he said that, you know, since when did this genre have to be all inclusive? You know, like if you follow the history of the genre, it has a heritage of incredibly confrontational people saying incredibly confrontational things when they were really young, and a lot of those people grow up and they don't think that way anymore. Ishon is a great example. You know, I despise his solo music. When he was an emperor, he was a very extreme individual. He certainly isn't that way anymore. It's at least not the impression I'm getting. You know, and you even look at other guys who've come under fire a bit more aggressively. You know, Nas from Eccles is a great example of that. I know him. Cheyenne knows him. The amount of rubbish that's been written about that guy online because of a couple of photos is just fucking absolutely ridiculous. And this comes from somebody who grew up in apartheid South Africa. I know what racists are. I had a class full of fucking lunatic racists when I was at school. It was just, you know, you kind of couldn't get away from it. And I can go into great detail about the amount of trouble and the amount of fights that I got into with these people. But I know the point I'm making is I know what that mindset is like because I've seen it firsthand. I've in all my dealings with Nas, I have never once gotten that vibe from him. I get it from you two guys, but not from him. I'm only teasing, of course.
But definitely chess being lunatics, I think. But I just find it interesting, like, you know, people that get into like a visceral and extreme genre of music that's kind of pushed the boundaries of sonics and concepts almost as far as it can be done, and then worry about like the fact that like extreme stuff pisses them off. I'm just like, I don't know, like it doesn't have to be like political or whatever, but like you see people trying to control like what other people are trying to say or trying to make the kind of the genre nice. But I think like, why get into a really extreme and visceral and creative and one of those genres that's kind of out there on a limb trying to push into new territories and then get offended that it is doing something extreme and challenging. It's a very strange hill to die on, in my opinion. And I think, you know, it needn't be like that. And I think that you can have intelligent conversations with people that you disagree with and still find a way forward as people. And I think that to a few people's credit, and it's only a handful of people, we've always said, look, if you've got some interesting or genuine questions and you actually want to talk to the band, then there's an open forum. Like, we run our own social page. Just send a message, like do an interview, like write for a magazine, like come and challenge us. But oftentimes it's just people who want to sit behind their screen and go like, racist or whatever. It's just like,
Chris Naughton was on Into the Necrosphere, and someone, this actually genuinely happened. Someone on Reddit said that I'm clearly far right because I don't like Randy Blythe from Lamb of God.
I mean, I mean, everything is these days, though, isn't it? And I guess that's one of the more difficult things about the use of those terms. It's just become this kind of like catch-all for I'm not winning here, so I'll just ban you or something else. It almost like erodes the true horror of some of the terms that they banned around, you know. And it's like, I just don't buy it, and I'm just like, and I think we're bored of it. I know that loads of people in the world are just bored of this vein of people that try and push the agenda. I do feel like it's going away a bit, and you know, it's not as kind of corrosive as it ever was. And I mean, there'll be people that think that about us till the day they die. Fine, whatever. You know, we just make music and albums. Like, don't come to a show, don't buy the record, and your life will be no different. You know, like it's fine. Don't worry about what I may or may not think.
And there was always the argument in the 80s with the PMRC, which again to me is this is the thing that I struggle most to wrap my head around when it comes to these elements in the scene. I'm like, when I got into the scene, we were all against censorship. It didn't matter how fucking wild and crazy the dude is, whether it was Blackie Lawless or Gigi Allen. You know, I didn't need to like the music. I love Wasp, but I didn't need to like the music to, you know, to be supportive of the person's right to do whatever he wants. And, you know, for whoever is listening to him to, you know, do your thing. It's not for me necessarily, but if you like it, you like it. I don't give a shit. And for that to have disappeared, and you know, you almost have people that are kind of like becoming these school moms in a scene like this, in a scene with this sort of heritage. It's befuddling to me.
I just don't get who like has made these people like arbitrators of morality or something like that, and like why they think they have this like kind of license to try and control what other people say or do because they don't like it. Like, you know, it's such a simple thing. Like, if it's not for you, then there's other things that are for you. So go and listen to those things, or go and interact with those things. If it doesn't make you happy, like, why are you here, like, trying to make other people unhappy? Like, I don't know. It just feels like basic humanity 101. If it's not for you, then
100%. Then, you know, move on. There's plenty of things not for. I don't like Taylor Swift. I don't stand outside her concerts protesting. I think that Olivia Rodrigo is harmful to my daughter, so I, you know, would love to forbid her from listening to it. But, you know, she doesn't want to, so I'm going to have to, you know, try and influence her positively with other stuff. So Imperious Horizon comes out September 1st, which is just around the corner. What are the plans for you guys?
It's the 13th, actually, yeah.
Okay, I was looking at Metal Archive, and it says September 1st, which is why I made the mistake. But what's the plans for you guys once that hits the shelves?
There's a few things coming up, I guess, isn't there?
There's a UK tour on the horizon. I think that's not been announced yet, has it?
No, I imagine in fact it will be by the time this goes out, so we may as well talk about it. So we're announcing a UK tour between the 4th and the 10th of November with a band called Wormwitch from British Columbia.
I know Wormwitch really well. Yeah, I had one of the dudes from Wormwitch on the podcast a couple of episodes ago. Fucking great dude.
Yeah. So with them and a band called Bizarre Cult from Norway.
Yeah, I know Bizarre Cult as well.
Very good. So yeah, we'll be doing that. We're doing a few, various members of us are doing some kind of like in-store signing type of events just in the lead up to the album. So I think we're the 12th of September, we're at Dark Earth Records in Wallasey, just near Liverpool. The 13th, which is the kind of first day of that, what's it called, festival? Cosmic Void Festival, we're at Raven Records in Camden. And then the week after, we're at Black City Records on the 21st in Bristol. So just doing a kind of a few sort of signing events and letting people hear the record for the first time and come and meet the band. Like, we've never really done that kind of thing before. And I don't know, it just feels like there's some brilliant record stores, and they're becoming a little bit of a dying breed to some extent. So I'm quite keen that we engage people with the awesome looking physical product. And then,
the cover of the album is fucking fantastic. And I saw Alan had posted the care package you guys sent him. I think that had the vinyl and stuff in it. The whole packaging, everything just looks fantastic, top notch.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was probably one of the more easier album covers to choose, wouldn't you say?
I mean, they always come with a bit of debate, don't they? But I think this one in particular, when I did see the vinyl, I must say, I thought one of the more striking images. It's just a really clean, well-defined photograph, and the sort of blue, frosty atmosphere that's across all the artwork really sort of fits with a lot of the music on this album, I think.
Yeah, awesome. There's definitely a frostier tone to this one in some ways, I think, across the whole piece. And we had live mix in it, so it was quite interesting, sort of balancing all those things out. But yeah, it was quite the process to finish it this time. But making the music was the easy part, and like getting it all to work cohesively together was definitely a challenge to my mind. But we got there in the end.
I think this is potentially the longest sort of gestation period we've had from recording an album to physically getting it out there. I think it's probably the longest we've sat on something, isn't it?
We're getting on for a year by this point since we first recorded it.
Yeah.
I think by the time it comes out, it'll almost be a year. I think we were recording it I think we did the drums like the first few weekends of September, and then like the main body of the album in October. So yeah, we're not far off it being a year since it was done.
What was the reason for waiting so long? Is it the vinyl delays, or what caused that?
Some of that, yeah. I mean, some of it was me being a giant pain in the arse, I think, as well. Like I don't know how many mixes we did, like 25 maybe or something like that.
We went through a very painful mixing process, but the problem is that you've got a good few number of absolute anal audiophiles in the band, so it gets to a point. Yeah, so it gets to a point where it's like, and we're then listening to 4 variants of a final mix, but then 4 variants of the master of that as well, and because we had more of a hands-on input into the mastering process this time, because it's the first time we've worked with a guy called Mark Minette. You might know him. He produced and did the last couple of My Dying Bride albums.
Okay.
So yeah, so he has a studio in Manchester, which is nice and easy for us. So we were over there, and he was very much up for having us being involved in that process. And me and Chris did a full day with him. But then there was so many file shares after that, and tweaks, and maybe a bit more of this, and it was getting to a point where we had to say, we're going to have to stop this now.
Yeah, time out.
Yeah,
I think we were certainly at like 20 plus mixes and maybe 7 or 8 masters by the time we were like, look, this is like making us all crazy now, so let's like kind of draw a line under it. And I think it was to its benefit, obviously we had more keyboards this time. There's a lot more vocals in various different guises. Like the guitars are a bit more kind of like frosty up front this time, and there's definitely some different sonic inputs from the band this time in the format of obviously a rock band like we are. But it has a lot more going on, and we really needed to find a way to balance that, and that came with some frustrations, primarily for Chris Fielding, who had to then remix like 15 tracks every time we made some like tweak like that, and then that drags out, and then like you say, once that was finished by whatever it was, like March or something like that, then you in this situation of, well, it's a snow covered album, do you really want to bring it out on the 1st of June? Probably not. And also it takes a while for things like vinyl to be pressed, and for things to kind of videos to be recorded and assets to be kind of got in the right shape so that they can go out to people and stuff. And there's this whole kind of like landscape of stuff, minutiae, that has to go in the background before albums are released, and that's almost like another half of the process in itself.
By the way, Nick, you made a grave mistake by using the word audiophile. If I were to take a guess, just for your background is blurred, is that a Marshall? Not Marshall, sorry. Is that a Macintosh amp behind you?
It's certainly not. No, it's probably my iron.
No, because I could see the blue, and I was like Macintosh amps have those blue VU meters, and I was wondering why that's not bad.
Just I'm having to do this from the conservatory because we've got some renovations going on at the minute. So I've got this little temporary setup. So you don't want to see it unblurred, trust me. But it's definitely not the amplifier that we're thinking it is.
Yeah. No. Well, I've made a deal with the audience. It's audiophile stuff once a year, so I will save them from another 45 minutes worth of talk about amplifiers and all sorts of bullshit. But guys, thank you so much for your time. I kind of feel like this is going to be on episode 241. We're probably 240 episodes late in doing this, and we definitely need to do another one at some point. Maybe something in person when we get the chance to make Diaries Align and actually sit down and have a beer. Talk some shit. Yeah. I feel like we've done the preface now. Time for chapter 1 to begin.
Yeah, we need to get into the kind of the early earache albums, don't we? And the kind of the real nitty gritty of the Morbid Angel and Diacide demos that we that's where
Mosh 1 to 20 special. Yeah.
Oh yes. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, listen. Congratulations on the Imperious Horizon. It is a fantastic record, and I mean, I think you set the table with the Reckoning Dawn. For me, that was a real triumph. The Imperious Horizon, I think, is the next level for you guys, without a doubt.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
The Edge of Tyranny by Winterfylleth off their forthcoming album, The Imperious Horizon. It is due out on September the 13th, 2024 via Candlelight Records, and I don't give a flat fuck whether you thought their previous albums were dog shit or whether you absolutely loved them. This is an album that you absolutely have to add to your rotation. I said it at the beginning of the show, a career-defining record for these guys, and based on what they've put together here, I'm really excited about what the future holds for them. They'll almost certainly be back on the podcast. Hopefully I can do a face-to-face with them at some point. Of course, they are coming to London, so who knows, we might be able to get something set up for then. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you to them for their time, and I want to say thank you to you guys for listening. The fun is only just beginning, though. Because before we get to the news rant, the gentleman from a band called Imperial Demonic out of the UK dropped me a note a couple of weeks ago, asked me to check out their EP, which had been released on Black Lion Records in 2023. Somehow managed to fly under my radar, but it is fucking spectacular. And that's why I'm going to play you a track off of it right now, just as a little bit of an appetizer, a warm-up for the news rant. This is a song called The Furnace.
No one is pure, morally graceful, too much to endure.
You just listened to a track called The Furnace. The band is Imperial Demonic, and that's off their EP Beneath the Crimson Eclipse. Released by Black Lion Records back in April of last year. How it flew under my radar, I don't quite know, but we've discovered it now. So we can make up for it. Head over to the Imperial Demonic Bandcamp if you like what you heard. I'll post a link to that in the description to the podcast. Same as with Winterfylleth. And you know the drill. If you buy yourself any music, you let them know that it was old Jackson at Into the Necrosphere who sent you. Right now, Legion, if you're the kind of half-man that comments complete and utter slobbering dribble like it's the small things in life that counts to other completely inane garbage that some floozy you're following on Twitter posts, no one that I know specifically, then it's time to take your simp ass and hit the bricks, because this is the Weekly News Rant.
Round them up for judgment. And hang them where the world can see.
Defeated Sanity are streaming a new song, it says here, in the wake of their next full-length installment release, Chronicles of Lunacy, due out on November the 22nd. Through Season of Mist, brutal death metal purveyors Defeated Sanity offer in listening a brand new single called Temporal Disintegration. This one, of course, follows hot on the heels of the first single off of Chronicles of Lunacy. That one was called The Odor of Sanctity. I loved it. Thought it was a total fucking slam dunk, 10 out of 10 top-notch example of high-quality brutal death metal in 2024. So without further ado, let's see if this one lives up to the benchmark its predecessor has set. Okay, so one small complaint that I've got. It's actually not small. I wouldn't say it's terminal, but I would have preferred a bit more of a groove in Josh Welshman's vocals. Really not even in his vocals so much as his lyrical delivery. And perhaps it's because on the official lyric video that's included here, you can actually read the lyrics. So I'm following along as he's singing. And whether this was intentional or not, I don't know, but his delivery is just very, very stunted. He's not gone the way of the typewriter vocal line, which you all know I can't stand whatsoever. But there's just not a natural flow to the way that he's doing those lyrics. And those lyrics, in fairness, when I look at them, I was quite surprised to see that he's credited as the co-writer of the lyrics, because they seem to lack a bit of that too. I've mentioned many times before great examples of where that's done properly. Werewolves, to me, is one that comes to mind. I still firmly believe that it's because Sam enjoys him some gangster rap, and he has he kind of has a natural rhythm that he puts into those lyrics, and I think that makes them sound or land that much better. Frank Mullen is another guy who can do that extremely well. I think Ross from Immolation is also extremely good at that. But yeah, everything else is working. The music sounds very cool. You know, it's you kind of know what you're going to get really when the song starts. It's not like you listen to it and you go, wow, I can't wait to hear the progressive bit. But it's, you know exactly what, that these dudes have an intent to beat you upside the head, probably for the better part of 5 minutes, and you're going to love every second of it. So I like the song, but I would have loved a little bit more of that groove. I'm a groove man when it comes to vocals, especially in death metal. I think death metal vocals should be an additional instrument. Yeah, it feels very... It feels very broken off from the rest of the band, if that makes sense. But let's give it another 60 seconds. I'm going to stop it right there. Now, that line that he just delivered there, skepticism overwhelming my consciousness, way more groove than we had on really anything that came before it. So there, he's nailing it, in my opinion. But, first minute or so, first minute and a half, I wanted more. Another good line, distrust is gnawing at my instincts. Love the way he delivered that. Again, overall, I think it definitely deserves a thumbs up, the song. And if you're into brutal death metal, you've certainly heard that and went, God damn, I can't wait for November. But it just could have been that a little bit better. Maybe it's a production thing. Like I said, maybe they did it on purpose. Who knows? Moving on. We've got Mammoth Grinder announcing Undying Spectral Resonance EP. Punk-infused old-school death metal unit Mammoth Grinder are set to make their return with a newly announced EP, Undying Spectral Resonance, on November the 15th via Relapse Records. I am almost certain that Mammoth Grinder was a band whose demo I may have reviewed for Chronicles of Chaos, and I'm actually just looking it up right now to see if that was indeed the case. Somewhere along the line I came across these guys fucking years ago, and I just can't quite remember where or when that happened. But either way, album cover certainly looks promising enough. They got a pentagram in the logo, so that means we have to hit play. That's pretty mediocre. It's Extinction of Humanity is the record I'm thinking about, and I think it was actually not Chronicles of Chaos. It may well have been Metal Rules, who I did something for there. But either way, song boring. Ginger have debuted a new track. Back in the day, Napalm Records used to be truly cutting edge when it came to releasing truly gnarly, groundbreaking, brilliant black metal, including Abigor. We'll talk more about Abigor later on in the news rant. And in years gone by, they seem to have made a bit of cash from a few bands of a certain ilk, and they've just decided they're going to continually dip their finger into that well. Now, Ginger aren't necessarily of that ilk. I speak specifically of like female-fronted gothic metal, but you know, we've got a woman singing in Ginger. I don't really care much for their music, but that being said, I've now committed myself and you to hearing it. It says here, check out Ginger's brand new single, Rogue, which serves as the second preview tune taken from their highly anticipated fifth studio album to be released via Napalm Records in winter 2025. The accompanying video clip was directed by Tima Kuskotson. Ginger on Rogue. Our new single, Rogue, is a reaction to many things. It's brutally honest, it's in your face, and one of the most intense tracks Ginger has ever released. We're so excited about this new track, about the new album, and everything that's on the way. All right, it's not too terrible. It's not something I'm going to get giddy with excitement over, but I think Tatiana may look pretty decent vocals. Music is, you know, relatively bog standard. Again, nothing spectacular, nothing to be offended by. One thing that I am very excited about, as many of you know, is the new 1349 album. I have already heard it, but I'm just excited about the fact that they're putting it out. And really, in my view, this band are back with a vengeance. All the singles prove it thus far. I'm super excited about seeing them at Inferno next year in Norway. This is definitely an album they needed to put out, in my opinion. So, prepare yourselves, it reads here, as 1349 unleash Inferior Pathways, the latest onslaught from their upcoming album, The Wolf and the King. The latter comes out on October the 4th. It has been a top-notch across the board for every single track we've listened to off this record so far. Spoiler alert, it's going to be the same thing for this song, but you decide for yourself. Let's hear what it sounds like. It's got hooks, it's got riffs for days. Every single man in this band is performing at the absolute peak of their instrumental and creative powers. no doubt it's got superb lyrics, thanks to my man Swatov, who writes the lyrics for 1349. And for me, the thing that is most exciting is I feel like this album harkens back to Beyond the Apocalypse, which I really think was, up to this point in time, 1349's greatest moment. This is fucking spectacular, and it gets a unrelenting, unequivocal top-notch. The Wolf and the King, and I'll tell you something right now, I will take a bet that this is going to be very, very high up on a lot of the Legion's top 30 of 2024. And to quote Lord Melchett from Blackadder, you can call me Susan if that isn't so. By the way, how I'm going to do my top 30 this year will be exactly the same as the way I did it for last year's releases. I will do it early in 2025. My holiday schedule is slightly different, though. I'm actually going to South Africa on the 31st of December, and then I'm back on January the 14th. So in all likelihood, I will possibly kick the show off in the second to last week of January, and then I'll do 3 episodes back to back. I'll keep it at 30, even though this year, even narrowing it down to 30 seems like it's going to be nearly impossible. Excuse me, but I'll narrow it down to 30, and I'll get on the usual range of guests to be confirmed. Sensei Mike Hill, of course, will do the top 10 with me as per normal. But we'll do, 30 down to 21, 20 down to 11, and so on and so forth. Some fucking serious records have come out this year. That is for sure. And you can add 1349 to that. It is brilliant, and you'll be amazed if it's not on my list. All right, Bart Kryziuk's Batushka to change name to Patriarch. It says here, it seems like the days of having 2 Batushkas are soon to be over. After Krzysztof Dabrowski's Batushka version was the one to keep the name after the court decision, this year will mark the final concert of Bart Kryziuk's Batushka. Using the Batushka name afterwards, they will resume activity using the name Patriarch. Read the statement below. I'm not going to bother reading the statement. What I will say is, Batushka... By the way, I just started laughing because Fallen Ghost comments at the about this article that he missed the opportunity for using the name Bartushka. Fallen Ghost, whoever you are, that's fucking brilliant. Anyway, I'm not going to bother reading that very lengthy word salad that they've posted there in comment. I'm pretty indifferent to Batushka, I've got to say. And I feel like they were a band who were very much in the ascent, and when all the court case and the legal malarkey and stuff started, I feel like people kind of lost interest a little bit. I think, generally speaking, when it comes to black metal in particular, death metal to a point as well, but black metal especially, there's this reflexive thing where we just seem to not want to. It takes us out of the experience of being a fan of that band. And I might be way off base here. Tell me in the comments if that is so. But if I think about Gorgoroth, for example, when Ad Majorem Satanas Glorium came out, they were the biggest thing to come down black metal spike in ages. Q, King, and Gol leaving the band. There's back and forth court bullshit about the name. Next thing you know, they put out that god-awful pile of shit that Infernus wrote when King and when Gol was away. And obviously King and Gol did Godseed as well. Now again, musically you could argue those two are lesser records, in fact much lesser records. But does anyone want to place a bet as to whether Gorgoroth could fill a 200-person venue anywhere other than Norway right now? And I think that's in part because court cases and the business side of things really can derail the momentum of a band. As a matter of fact, while we're on that topic, let's just jump straight to the news about Vitriol that came out this week, because I think the two are connected, at least to a degree. So I'm going to find it, if you bear with me for just a second. News essentially leaked that the Vitriol guitarist left, apparently not the first time that he has done so. I think some person might have commented, and this might just be a throwaway comment, but some person commented on Facebook that this is the 8th time that he's quit the band. But leaves the tour midway through and then essentially leaves Kyle and the drummer to continue as a two-piece for the rest of the dates. Now, initially I looked at that and I went, I'd be fucking annoyed as hell if I paid, money for a ticket to see Vitriol, get to the show, and there's two dudes on stage. But I get where they're coming from, because they are, this is not a Metallica level band, so most likely they stand to lose a significant amount of money if they were to back out of those dates. Not only are they losing money, but the bands that are booked in with them, like Necrofire, for example, and whoever else is on that bill, they stand to lose money. So Kyle and the drummer, whose name escapes me, has no choice really but to continue. Whereas the guitarist, I think the right thing to do, the professional thing to do, whether you hate the man's guts, whether you hate Kyle's guts or not, is to say, look, I don't think I can continue in this band anymore. I understand we're committed for X number of dates. I'll honor those dates, and then when we're done with the tour, consider that my notice served, and we'll be going our separate ways. That's the way to handle it. You don't just drop out of a fucking tour midway through. I can't just, if I would to quit my job, I'm not allowed to just do, pull a George Costanza and say, after a lengthy monologue about how much I hate my boss, which I don't, by the way, I really like her, but after a lengthy monologue about how much I hate my boss, I storm out, and that's the end of it. You have to serve a notice period. So, in theory, from my perspective, I think that the former Vitriol guitarist, I don't personally think I would be comfortable if I were in a band and I were looking to bring somebody in. I don't think I'd be comfortable hiring him. If I were the management of a band who were considering bringing him in, I would advise them not to do so. And there's no slight on him. I just think maybe it's a learning opportunity, as they say. But yeah, you just can't leave a tour midway through. So, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is musicians, bands, be careful about who you do business with. Because it's one thing to rule on stage. It's another thing to put out great records. Another thing entirely to run a successful business, which, when you get to a certain level with a band, that is the reality of it, is you are in business with somebody. All right, so next up we've got Solstafir announcing finally that they are putting out their next full-length in November. That's kind of been on the cards considering the fact that they've been releasing singles. So I don't know why it's even an announcement at this point. I think really just confirming the release date. And the release date, it says here, is November the 8th via Century Media Records. Both of those singles I have fucking loved. So that is another one that I am very excited about. Then we've got The Spirit Room 101 single unveiled. I very nearly got excited there and thought Spirit World were putting out something new. Spirit World, of course, if you have not checked out that Death Western record, I've spoken about it many times on the podcast. It is fucking fantastic. And the fact that you got the dudes in the band going on stage wearing Stetsons and pulling it off as brilliantly as they do, it makes me like them even more. All right, melodic black and death representatives The Spirit are sharing Room 101, another new single off their upcoming 4th studio record, Songs Against Humanity. The latter drops on October the 25th, 2024 via AOP Records. Let's hear what it sounds like.
Suppressing the words of sanity.
Not terrible. I like the opening riff. I could probably do with less of the black and roll in the chorus, or not in the verse, I should say. I'm not really familiar with the Spirit to any great degree, but yeah, this is all right. Doesn't do a huge amount for me. It reminds me a little bit of Mantar, and Mantar, I think, is also a band I can take in small doses. They're just not a band I want to listen to for any length of time. Unlike Spirit World, I have been rinsing Death Western over the last couple of days. I think it is just perfect modern metal. And I've mentioned this before, but I think it's a complete disgrace that they weren't asked to be on the Pantera tour, or frankly that Metallica haven't taken them out. That to me is like a band that could be amongst the very upper, they could be in the upper echelon of modern metal. Mayhem have confirmed 40th anniversary tour dates taking place in Germany. I'm wondering whether or not we're going to get a Mayhem announcement for Inferno. I don't think so, but it would be nice if that were to happen. I did pitch an idea to Katie about something that if it happens, it's going to be fucking huge, and it'll happen at Inferno. I'm not going to share any more other than that, but you could probably put 2 and 2 together and tell that it's Mayhem related, but not quite Mayhem related. But yeah, if it does happen, you guys are going to be first to know, and you are going to be very happy indeed. Tribulation have debuted a new single for the track Hungry Waters. Hungry Waters is a brand new preview tune from Tribulation's upcoming studio record Sub Rosa in Aeternum out on November the 1st, 2024. And it is premiered online in the form of an official music video. I've quite liked the previous Tribulation stuff that I've heard, especially the last single. I think it was myself and the Sinister Minister that checked that one out. And that was a very pleasant surprise. So let's hear what Hungry Waters sounds like. I am digging the direction that the new Tribulation tracks have gone. I noticed there's a comment about it below the video as well. Clearly, a lot of Madrugada and a lot of early Moonspell was listened to in the run-up to making this record, and the songs and the material's better off for it, in my opinion. I've never been the biggest fan of the stuff that they did previously. Maybe I need to go back and check and revisit those, just to sense check whether my initial impression was on point or not. But this is cool. It's well produced. It's well played. Very catchy. Like the clean vocals. Like the whole atmosphere around it. Again, I said Madrugada and Moonspell. It kind of feels like it incorporates some of the best atmospherics from those two bands, and probably a host of others that just aren't immediately popping into my head. But this, folks, I think is our second top notch for the week. But anyway, before we confirm its top-notch status, let's give it another 60 seconds. Yeah, I love it. I think it's very good. I think one of the other things I enjoy about it is the dynamic shift when it goes from the verse into the chorus. It's not overdone. A lot of times, bands that make this style of music, when they make that transition, they want to really get heavy, and it just sounds tacked on. Yeah, that's not the case. There's a natural flow to the song, and I just think it works. Kudos to these guys. And well done to them for being brave enough to go down this route fully, or to fully commit to the style. Again, I say that with a caveat that I need to go back and I need to listen to their earlier records, but I'm liking this one for sure. The only negative there really is that some of those lyrics, from what I could tell, could potentially be used by those simps that I hate so much. They'll send it to the women online that they're obsessed with and say that it's their poetry. Anyway, Massacre have put out details of their new album. It says here, Massacre proudly announced the details of their long-awaited fifth studio album, Necrolution, set for release on November the 8th via Ragonia Records. Necrolution, of course, what we want to sentence all simps to. You're going to get yourself necrolectrocuted. Recorded at DOA Studios, Full S Studios, and Gojiden Studio in Florida. Mixed and mastered by Johnny Patterson at Studio Unbound in Sweden. The album's first single, The Color Out of Space, is being premiered now in the form of a lyric video. 16 tracks on this album. So pretty ambitious stuff. Let's hear what it sounds like. So Massacre's current drummer, John Rudin, based out of the UK, has been in a ton of bands. Dead Sun, From Ruin, Heads for the Dead, Human Harvest, Just Before Dawn. If you go back and you listen to releases by any of those bands, you will hear that he is a substantially more capable drummer than the performance on this song would suggest. Especially that drum line during the verse. To me, that's very weak. It's weak, and it doesn't sound in keeping with, or it does nothing to embellish the impact of the rest of the song. As far as the rest of the song is concerned, it's all right. I think Cam Lee's vocals sound reasonable. The chorus, that hooky bit that we were just listening to now, yeah, it's all right. But death metal, much like black metal, has for sure seen the bar raised exponentially over the last 12 months, 24 months, probably a little longer than that. But it's just like, from my perspective, I hear a record like that and I go, how does it really fit in with anyone beyond the Massacre faithful? And I like a lot of the early Massacre stuff, and it's not really doing anything for me. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think it's going to do much for anybody else either. Okay, let's move along. Ripped to Shreds have put out a brand new single. It says here, Death Metal Unity, Ripped to Shreds have revealed Visions of Sin, Mirror of Darkness, another new preview tune from their oncoming studio album Sanity. I had Sheriff Mike Scondado one year when we listened to the first Ripped to Shreds track, and if memory serves me correctly, I did quite like it. So let's hear what this one sounds like. I fucking love that. If you said to me you have to choose to listen to either Rip to Shreds or Massacre for the rest of your life, I would take Rip to Shreds any day of the week and twice on Sundays. This is fucking brilliant. Unashamedly old school. I think the vocalist sounds like he's tormented by some sort of, wasting bowel disease. But it just works. Everything about it just works. So, thumbs up. Depending on what the next 60 seconds sounds like, we might even be headed to top-notch territory for these lads. There's a bit of a Dismember vibe to this song, and again, I mean that as a compliment. A lot of love I've noticed as well recently for Dismember, that I certainly can't recall seeing to quite the degree that it's manifesting nowadays. People talking about Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, Indecent and Obscene as, being records that they absolutely love, which is great because those are two superb albums. And I can hear shades of that on this song as well. But I think it's fair to say Rip to Shreds deserve them a Into the Necrosphere top-notch. That's a fucking cool tune. All right, Paradise Lost shows in Latin America confirmed. It says here, in April and May 2025, Paradise Lost will embark on a headline run in Latin America. The Devil Embraced Latin America tour encompasses 10 shows in total, starting in Monterrey, Mexico on April the 24th, 2025. Interesting use of art, and then also interesting name for the tour. Who would like to bet that there's going to be an announcement for a new Paradise Lost album not too far from now, and that album is going to be called The Devil Embraced? We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, next up, Opeth reveal a new single. The second single from Opeth, Chapter 3 of their oncoming studio album, The Last Will and Testament, is available for listening down under. The new music output comes out on October 11th via Reigning Phoenix Music. A lot of excitement, including excitement from yours truly over that first song, featuring Michael back on the growls, back on growl detail. We're about to find out whether or not that was all done to lure us in, and then pull the old switcheroo on us and go straight back to the yes worship, the King Crimson worship of Incorda, Venenum, and Sorceress. All right, let's just pause there because it's been 64 seconds of straight up prog noodling now, and I'm not feeling positive about it. I won't lie. I was, like many, as I've just mentioned a few seconds ago, I was very, very excited to hear Michael bring back the death metal vocals. I thought that previous song was a great mix between the progressive stuff of the last several records, or the last 3-4 records, I should say, and just at least bringing back a little hint of the early days, the heyday, the halcyon days, in my view. This, though, is not my tempo. Absolutely not. But that being said, let's give it another 60 seconds.
Was still when I broke the seal. Finally, winter morning shades. I knew a ransom must be paid out.
This is going to get a hard pass from me. I'm willing to listen to this in the context of the whole album. It's only 5 minutes 10 seconds long, which is relatively short by Opeth standards. It could very well be that this is just a different flavor of the record, and that elsewhere, it kind of finds its feet again, and maybe the song makes perfect sense when you listen to the record end to end. There's definitely that element to everything that Opeth have done. I think with the exception of a handful of songs, there's not really a huge number of Opeth tracks that you can just throw on for 2 minutes and immediately love. That being said, I'm hearing a lot of the parts of Opeth that kind of put me off them in the first place. And when I say off them, it turned me indifferent to their new music. I didn't get excited about it anymore. I mean, I remember hearing My Arms, Your Hearse, Still Life, Blackwater Park. Those 3 albums were flawless and still are. Deliverance and Damnation, lots of hype around that, and I never got into them quite like I did those three that I just mentioned. Ghost Reveries, I didn't enjoy either. I thought the change in production was too abrupt, and then Watershed I thought was a real return to form. Heritage I didn't enjoy. Pale Communion I thought was a better stab at doing that progressive stuff. And then Sorceress and in Court of Venom, I actually, frankly, couldn't get past about 5 songs without wanting to switch it off. So, okie doke, let's move on. Undeath have launched a new track, death metal for well-adjusted and happy people. The Rochester, New York death metal bruisers, Undeath's latest track, Disputatious Malignancy, is the second single to be taken from their forthcoming third album, More Insane, which is set for release on October the 4th through Prosthetic Records. Wasn't massively impressed by the first one, or the first single. Is here if this one can change my mind. Nope. It's mildly better than the than the previous single, but I'm still unconvinced. There's nothing there that I listen to and I go, yeah, I feel the testosterone, I feel the rage. Again, I know plenty of people might think otherwise, but when you've listened to death metal for as long as I have, it's going to take a lot more than that to get you excited. Nachtmuseum have another new track streaming. It says here, Nachtmuseum have dropped a brand new song called A Slow Decay, which serves as the second single from their next studio album, Blight Privilege, set to be released on November the 1st through Prophecy Productions. We assume Slow Decay is in reference to the banknotes that Blake simply can't remember where he buried it, the banknotes that he ripped off from fans who bought merchandise from him that he never sent. Anyway, let's hear what A Slow Decay sounds like. I never thought that I would say this about new Nachtmuseum music, especially not after that bucket of fucking dog turd that they released previously, Predator Phoenix. But this is actually listenable. It's still not top tier black metal, that's for sure. I don't think that's necessarily what Blake is going for anymore nowadays in any case. But there's interesting things going on here. I quite like the atmospherics of that clean guitar that he's got going in the background. It sounds like, I don't know, I always think about that guitar as the cowboy guitar. You guys know what I mean, the country guitar. I think it sounds that sounds pretty decent. I kind of like the laid back, slightly somber tone to the song. I think that works. In a weird way, it actually reminds me a little bit, that kind of melancholic tone reminds me a little bit of the second to last Inquisition record, which, interestingly, I didn't enjoy. The one that had Luciferian rays on it. Black Grave or Black Mass for a Black Grave. Not something I enjoyed. The new Inquisition album, different story altogether. But yeah, this one... as I said, it's a more listenable track. I'm still not bowled over by it, and as far as I'm concerned, Blake can still go fuck himself. But it's just not this song I don't instantly hate. Let's put it that way. Okay, let's check out two more. Lamb of God former drummer Chris Adler launches new band. Former Lamb of God drummer Chris Adler has joined forces with vocalist Alex Vitriol, guitarist Tim Ossenfort, bassist Taylor Brand, and keyboardist Tim King in a new American rock band called Shallow Rising. Apparently they set out to find the most banal name they possibly could. Shallow Rising sounds like what happens when Chris's hair, that's no doubt falling out at the moment, clogs up the bath drain. I can only imagine this is better than the Firstborn, though, the previous record or previous band that he was in. Perhaps is still in at the moment, because that truly was a blight on the man's career, especially after the heights that he reached with Lamb of God. As I've said many times before, don't like the new Lamb of God record, but everything up to that was fucking top tier modern metal, regardless of the fact that I think that Randy Blythe is a weasel. But let's hear what Shallow Rising and their brand new track Further sounds like. I mean, you should probably have expected it with a name like Shallow Rising, but, the old theme of surveillance state. Guys, let's come up with this concept where everyone's like being tracked by the government and their AI cameras. So fucking everyone has sung about that. The music itself as well, it sounds like something that they would use to advertise some throwaway wrestling pay-per-view. Really, the only thing that's good about it is Chris Adler's drumming, and Chris belongs in Lamb of God, and he needs to bend fences with his bandmates, because Art Cruz is all right, but he's no Chris Adler. He is sorely missing from Lamb of God, and Lamb of God is sorely missing from him. That's for goddamn sure. It's better than Firstborn. I mean, if you truly want to. As a matter of fact, fuck it. I'm going to let you guys hear it. You know what I mean? I have had it on the news rant before, but this really was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. I mean, it is so bad. It's almost on a par with Striper. That's how shit it is. But the very first song they put out, which, funnily enough, was premiered by Banger TV, thereby torpedoing all their credibility, was a song called Anthem. And just listen to 60 seconds of this tripe and pay special attention to the lyrics, because it is truly the ramblings of a fucking idiot. There's no other way to describe it. That's the line that got me the most. They make you the make you the victim of their misguided souls. Just, Jesus, it's lame. But anyway, as I said, the one slightly better thing about Shallow Rising is that at least Chris can actually play drums like Chris plays. Not whatever the fuck was going on with Firstborn. But anyway, let's listen to a band that is sure to not disappoint. Fuming Mouth, Metal on Metal single premieres. Massachusetts-based Fuming Mouth are unveiling a brand new single/lyric video. The song is called Metal on Metal. It was produced by the great Kurt Ballou. My view, I've said this many times before, in the top 3, in the conversation for the top 3 best producers working today. He's done so much fucking great work with so many great bands. It's astonishing. And he seems to be able to lend his hand to just about any style under the sun. The only thing that I haven't actually heard him do much of is black metal. But that being said, black metal doesn't need production. All it needs is Satan, which is ironic given the band I've just had on this week. Anyway, let me zip my lip. Let's hear what Metal on Metal sounds like. I fucking love it. I mean, it is knuckle-dragging heaviness and testosterone-fueled aggression at its most basic, at its most primitive, but I fucking love it. Not on the level of I'll Find You, which was Fuming Mouth's masterpiece. I mean, it's their Enter Sandman, as far as I'm concerned. It's their Stairway to Heaven. But, I absolutely love it. I can see perhaps a couple of people will thumb their noses at it, but if you don't like man's music, then what can we do about it? Mark Ozagada says keeping his involvement with Kerry King a secret from Death Angel bandmates was the hardest part. I think he's spoken about that a couple of times before. As I said, I don't blame the dude. He's clearly going to make a lot more money with Kerry King than he's going to make with Death Angel. Much as I love Death Angel, it's just a fact of life. The bloke is in his 50s. As I said to Mortis last week, staring down the barrel of, growing older and, needing to make sure there's a little nest egg for him in retirement. I also saw an interview where he said that apparently his favorite song to play with Kerry King is Black Magic, which I don't blame him for. I would have done everything he did just to have the opportunity to be on stage with Kerry King singing Black Magic. We have got new Black Label Society music incoming, apparently. Kerry King Slayer's stage show for upcoming reunion dates will be the biggest so far. That's pretty interesting. I don't know exactly how it works, but who wants to take a bet they're not going to invest in a bunch of stage equipment so that they can play 2 shows? Max Cavalera, the spirit of the original Sepultura, is here with Cavalera. I tend to agree with him. You guys know my thoughts on this Cavalera, on these Cavalera re-recordings, and I think I would suggest, based on the feedback I've received, about 98% of the Legion is aligned to me in their thinking on this. It is fucking fantastic. It's been the rebirth of these guys in my mind. All right, they've got video of this, so rather than me try and make sense of what's been transcribed, let's hear what Grandpa Max has to say.
But the way we did it, a lot of people like our version even better than the original, which is crazy. We actually ended up doing a couple new songs. There was one on Morbid Visions, Bash Devastation, the first two, which was Sexta-feira 13. It's an old song. I remember by heart and by mind. I don't know how. After all these years, I still remember the chorus. So we made the song with the chorus. We just made a new song using the old chorus, which is the oldest Sepultura song ever. Is Sexta-feira 13. Yeah. And on the new Schizophrenia, there's a new song called Nightmares of Delirium, which is very, very kind of like a fan letter song to the album Schizophrenia. You know, this is how much we love this album. We're gonna make a song inspired by this record. Yeah. And I think it came out, again, really good, really, really powerful. You know, tonight we get to play a lot of Schizophrenia, which I'm very happy. Last time we were here, I don't think we have mostly Morbid Visions and Bash Devastation. So
I'll tell you what I like. Max Cavalera seems to be in pretty decent shape. There's been some times where he's looked a little worse for wear. Igor, seems to be the dude that doesn't really grow old. But yeah, man, I'm just glad to see those guys are in a good place. And like I said, for all of the jokes I've made about Max Cavalera's lyrics, maybe a few mean things that I've said about Cavalera Conspiracy, their actual studio records and, maybe even Soulfly, I think that these Cavalera re-recordings are magic. I mean, just 10 out of 10. All right, we'll wrap up on this one. Chuck Billy on upcoming Testament album. It sounds new, modern, and fresh. In a new interview with Metal Express Radio's Bryce Van Patten, Testament vocalist Chuck Billy was asked how the songwriting process has changed since the band's early days in the late 80s and 90s. He responded as transcribed by Blabbermouth, back in the day, we used to sacrifice cats before we go into the studio. Now we do our sacrificing when we're done recording. No, he actually says, before, back then, we all lived in the same place. We all had to go to the same studio, where now it's by email, sharing the songs. Everybody has home studios to work out demos. Definitely a different songwriting process. That's pretty typical to what we see with a lot of bands nowadays. And I do contend that there's something to creating in the band room. And I think a lot of bands that have lost that, you can kind of hear it in their music. A band like Testament, maybe not so much. As a side note, I do know how ironic it was, me wearing a Testament t-shirt on the thumbnail for the King Fowley interview, when, or at least the YouTube thumbnail of the King Fowley interview, given that he wasn't a fan of Chuck. But I can't, you guys know my thoughts on Testament. I fucking love them. I've never met the bloke. He might be a complete douche. I certainly hope that's not the case. But as far as Testament, especially their newer albums are concerned, I fucking love them. Asked if he and Testament bandmates have more freedom to do whatever they want now than when they were on a major label like Atlantic, Chuck says, totally. When we were on Atlantic, there was a big machine. They had an A&R department, they had the radio department, they had tons of departments, tons of money, and they were always influenced by how well their big selling artists were, which were radio bands. And they were pushing radio. So that A&R guy would be whispering in our ears, what's the next radio song? And we're thinking, well, we're not a radio band. And again, kudos to them. When a lot of other bands were wimping out, they did not do that. And, they stuck to their guns. They put out Demonic. They put out The Gathering. They put out Low. And all of those are fucking excellent. And I absolutely cannot wait for the next Testament. And I will definitely try my best, even though there's now a risk that he may turn out to be a goon. But I will try my best to get Chuck Billy on the podcast next year. That's one of my wish list guests. I've mentioned Blackie Lawless. Chuck Billy is another. Chelsea Wolfe is another person I'd love to have on the podcast. And then that idea that I pitched to Katie, that to me is the big one. That's the prize next year. More than that, I shall not say. Folks, it is time to wrap up both News Rant and the show for the week. It would be remiss of me not to share my condolences with the family and friends of Peter Kubik of Abigor. Abigor is a name that is synonymous with the roots of German black metal, really. Most bands, that you listen to, certainly from a certain generation, would be lying if they said they weren't influenced by Verwüstung / Invoke the Dark Age, by Orkblut, or by any of the Abigor records. Verwüstung was the first album that I remember getting. I loved it when it came out. Band I've not necessarily kept up with quite as much as I have other bands, but I always love them when I go back to them, and I was sad to learn that at the age of 49, and I don't know whether this has actually been officially confirmed, but it certainly seems that way based on the statement that the band released. Peter took his life. Really sad news, and he will be greatly missed by everybody in the black metal scene. And he leaves behind an absolutely incredible legacy, which we're actually going to close off with the very first Abigor song that I ever heard, Universe of Black Divine. I'll play that in just a second. But I would like to say to all of you, the Legion, thank you once again for touring, for tuning in to another episode of the show. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. I'm back next week with Necro's Horns. That is a fucking wild episode. Week after, I've got Tony from Oranzi Pazuzu. Whatever it is that you are doing and wherever it is that you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you bad motherfuckers again next week.